Welcome to the Film Rescue Show. I am your Pitchmaster General, Seth, and as you can see, I don't have my other hosts with me because this has been an adventure in the making, getting this episode on the slate. We technical difficulties, programs not working correctly, Discord needing to update itself. A lot of stuff had to happen to get us here. I am joined by. I should have asked. Do you want me to say your last name on air or not?
We'll go with first name, where this is my debut, as it were.
Well, we're debuting Cody here. You messaged in about doing this pitch a while back. We got you right onto the schedule and then kicked you right off the schedule and then got you right back on the schedule and then kicked you right back off the schedule. I'm so sorry. I apologize sincerely. That's how I want to start the episode.
If it makes you feel any better, all these hiccups, and yet this show runs a smoother operation than Congress. So
I'll take that as a compliment. I'll take that as a dub.
Yes. So long as we're not reaching the filibuster level, if you will, I think we're still good.
I'll try not to, but some of the topic matter in this movie gets me a little heated. I'm excited to get into it with you. Before we get into that, though, let's do our calls to action here. I would really like to, anyone listening or watching, direct them to our Patreon. You can get early access to all of our episodes, including this one if you're watching it there already, before they go live to YouTube or to any of your podcast streaming apps. If you don't want to support us monthly, you can support our merch store instead with a single purchase. We make a little bit of profit from everything on our merch store, so that's also a great way to support us. And Cody here has something else to support. You're a fan of a really cool sounding podcast you've been telling me about. Would you like to speak on that a little for our listeners? What have you been listening to, and why do you like it so much?
Okay, so the podcast I'm plugging is done by a friend of mine from college. Her name is Valerie Cartone, and it's called Prison Pod Productions. And as the name implies, the show is about the prison system. As she said in her opening audio clip, which I listened to, it's about reducing recidivism and saving lives by focusing on how we fix our prison problem, and also how do we make the Department of Corrections just that, a Department of Corrections. Her most recent season, she interviews prisoners, I believe, from around the country. Valerie, I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting that, who are on death row. And so she really, really focuses, on the heart of the problem. It's not sugar-coated or anything. And she's just a wonderful person. She, I believe, has a master's in social work.
Wow.
She has worked with prisoners in the state of Maine, I believe with Native American prisoners. So she knows the system. It is not commentary. It is knowing everything you need to know and telling the public what you need to know.
Yeah.
And opening a new door into a world that we don't really talk about.
Right. Yeah, I think that's awesome work. It's something that's very near and dear to me. I've had my own brushes with with our system, and it is broken, and it is hurting people, and it is so cool to see someone taking the time to highlight that in an accessible way. So I really appreciate you letting us know about that. I'm going to put all the links, if anyone wants to check that out, down in the description of the podcast or video, wherever you're watching, so you can check it out from there. Speaking of people that are in a low-key prison, though, we want to talk about Carol Ann and Poltergeist 3 today, don't we?
Yes.
This was directed by Gary Sherman. This is the third film in the series, and I've seen the first, I've seen the remake, I've not seen the second, but now I have seen the third, thanks to you, Cody. Wow. This is a wild one. This is exactly what Film Rescue's for. I see exactly why you picked this one for the episode, but I'm really curious. What was your first watch like? Can you recall the first time you saw this film and how it struck you?
So I'm long-winded, so there's a bit of a story here.
Let me settle in. All right, I'll get the drink. Here we go.
Yeah. So when I was way back in kindergarten, which would have been 1990, I would sometimes walk into the living room, TV would be on. And back then, they didn't show trailers for horror movies or violent movies until certain hours.
Right.
And I see the now famous puddle scene in the trailer, just a side glimpse. And immediately I'm terrified. So fast forward years later, I think I'm in late senior year of high school, if not that year I took off between high school and college.
Sure.
And I see Poltergeist, the proper Poltergeist, and loved it and was shocked to see it was a Steven Spielberg film
Yeah.
because aliens tend to be more his forte, if not futurism.
Sure.
So to see his take on the supernatural was a very unique one, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then late night, and this is in the year between college and high school, I am flipping through channels. And back then, before streaming, TNT would show old movies on rerun at late night.
Okay.
And that's when I saw Poltergeist 2, not knowing there was a Poltergeist 2. So I watched it and liked what I saw, had a nightmare about the Reverend Kane.
Understandable. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, thought, damn, that nightmare would have been a great premise for a story, which is, and I do creative writing in my spare time.
Love it.
And then one day on the weekend, this is in the same year, Sci-Fi Channel apparently had nothing to show. And so they're showing reruns of old movies, and Poltergeist 3 came up. And I was like, oh, there was a third one. Oh, it's that movie that scared the crap out of me in kindergarten.
That's so funny. That's wild. I know exactly what it feels like to like not have access to that thing and then it just pops up randomly. That's so funny.
Yeah. So I'm watching it knowing who the characters are. I'm liking that they're continuing the story with Kane, even though it's really supposed to be resolved by now.
Right.
I'll get to that a little later in my pitch. And then I'm watching the movie, and it's coming across as a very well put together movie.
Mm.
And then, of course, the puddle scene. And then after the puddle scene, it's basically a shit show. I'm trying to figure out, okay, this is good. I am intrigued. Carol Ann's on the other side. Donna's on the other side. Scott's on the other side. Oh, Tangina's here. Thank God she's here. And then they kill her. And I'm like, what? Okay, this is a problem. They're going to solve it. But the problem just gets worse because from there on out, it's just one mindless scare attraction to the next.
Yeah.
And I would explain that further, but then that would take us to positives and negatives. And then when the movie ended, I was just, what?
Ooh.
I mean, it's in negatives anyway, but I'll save us the trouble. The ending, it makes no sense because you're seeing the whole family together, except Scott. So you're wondering what the hell happened to him.
Yeah.
And then you hear Kane's voice in the background laughing like he just accomplished something. And it's like, did you just bring him into the light? Did that not happen?
Yeah.
So why is he laughing? I mean, what is the takeaway here? And if you're setting us up for Poltergeist 4, is he still here? What?
Right.
I mean, Poltergeist 2 left us with more. A normal person, in my opinion, in the 80s would see that and think, oh, well, they're not going to do another one. And if they do, it's going to definitely be with another ghost.
Sure.
But,
yeah, you would think.
Yes. So it's like, and I know this was all the 80s in a nutshell with literally any horror movie that became a success, but
it's like a formula you can see where the first two acts have to like make sense as a movie, and then they're assuming no one's paying attention and everyone's making out in the back of the theater, and you can just go off the rails for the last act. And
Yeah.
you see it happen again and again. The Friday the 13th movies, all of them are like paced pretty well in the first two acts, and then by the time you get to act three, it's like, why are we in this insane territory? Like, we're really running off the rails, and it could be grounded. It could, and we get to that later. I think horror now is much more grounded, and so maybe I miss this, like, the over the topness of this era. But it definitely, I agree, not to get too early into negatives, but that third act is rough. That third act is rough.
I know it, and it's like there is just no redeeming quality to it. And uh, as I was telling somebody, it's like you watch that movie, and I don't think anybody will ever want to name their kid Carol Ann ever again. Which
Oh my
I am.
god. It rings in my ears. Carol Ann will never leave. Like, I got to find a way to get it into my own writing now just to get it out of my head. How many times do you think they said that name in this movie?
Well, here's the thing. The first person I heard to point this out was Roger Ebert. If you YouTube the old Roger Ebert and Siskel clips, which, frankly, if you're a fan of this podcast, you should be doing that anyway,
Absolutely.
just to see Roger's review record. And side note, anybody who hasn't seen the documentary Life Itself needs to,
Yes. Oh
because
my god, yeah.
that is Roger's goodbye letter to us, his fans, and to movie lovers in general.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful show. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. Siskel was just described himself as relieved that Roger brought it up,
Hmm?
the constant screaming of Carol Ann, and not just Carol Ann, but the other characters as well, just calling out and expecting an answer. In
I'd wager that like 20% of this movie is characters walking around saying names out loud. Like,
uh,
what those days on set must have looked like.
yeah, I can get to that in just a sec. But they Siskel actually tried to, I guess, get into a bit of a betting contest over how many times the name Carol Ann is said, whether it's just in basic conversation or the calling out.
Right.
I thought Siskel had guessed 100 times grand total, or at least 100 times. Somebody had to have counted, so I Googled it because that's easier than doing it myself.
Sure.
And the first search that came up was I can't remember who, but a vlogger of some kind. No, a blogger of some kind. And he counted Carol Ann being said a grand total of 121 times throughout the duration of the film.
The movie's 98 minutes long. That is like 1.2 Carol Anns per minute.
Yes. And I did see an interview when I was doing my research with the screenwriter who he had an explanation as to why it came up so often. I
Okay. All
cannot
right.
remember it for the life of me, so unfortunately your listeners will have to do their own
If
YouTube search.
if there's sense behind it, I can get more on board. Maybe that's the mass hypnosis part is them just screaming her name at us a bunch to get us to think about her. So I bring up the mass hypnosis because
Oh yes.
this character whose name is said a lot, she's put through the ringer.
Mm. And that's really a tragedy because Heather O'Rourke died very shortly after they wrapped shooting on the original film. Anybody who YouTubes the original ending to this movie, you do get a full cast shot of everybody safe and sound that includes Scott and Heather O'Rourke's character, Carol Ann. So
Wow.
it is a myth that she died halfway through the film. She did live, but she died soon after they wrapped. Um, and that triggered the curse of Poltergeist
And
urban legend.
and she had played Carol Ann through the whole trilogy at this point too, right? This is her third performance.
She had, because
Wow.
she was present in all three films. And I'm trying to think of where I was going with this. Oh, yes, but well, I've lost my train of thought, but I'll stick with the curse of Poltergeist.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Um,
please. Yeah, I had brought up the mass hypnosis. That's how we got over here.
yeah. So Heather O'Rourke, from what I understand, died of a digestive problem that she had blockage in her
Oh
bowels.
wow, so
And
sad.
in fact, I have it written down. I kept the receipts on this matter.
Show notes, baby. I love it.
Yeah. Died of congenital stentosis. I suck at pronouncing complicated words. I'm sorry, people.
Wow.
Of the intestine, complicated by septic shock. She was only 12
Whoa.
years old.
That's so
And
sad.
I remember seeing an interview with her mother. Her mother was actually suing the doctor because the doctor had misdiagnosed her as having the flu.
Oh my God.
And I know. And when I didn't research this condition extensively because I barely understood what the lawyer was saying in this interview. But from what I understand is it was the family's understanding at the time that this could have been detected through a routine examination, which didn't happen. And that's why she was suing for malpractice. And what was really sad is if you look at Heather O'Rourke in certain shots of the movie, particularly where she's on the bed playing with the spelling toy. I
Mm-hmm.
forget what it's called. I just remember I was horrible at it when I was a kid, and it shows in my adult life, as you all just heard. Um, but you notice from certain angles, her face looks bloated. From frontal shots, she looks like a normal girl um, heading into that age where they're having growth spurs and the
Mm-hmm.
like.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at those angles, as I just said, her cheeks are puffy and her face takes a very awkward shape. And somebody, I can't remember who on YouTube, pointed out that that's the onset of her condition
Wow.
before the nightmare really began. And it's sad. And then, of course, it triggered the curse of Poltergeist, that urban legend, because she was one of three cast members who died from the franchise. The second was Will Sampson, who in the sequel played Taylor, the
Mm-hmm.
medicine man.
Mm-hmm.
His condition was sad too. He had some sort of environmental condition. I mean, the guy's weight dropped from 260 pounds to 140.
Whoa.
He, yeah, he, at the time of his death, was undergoing an organ transplant. I believe he was having his heart and his lungs replaced.
Whoa.
Your listeners may have to fact check me on that. And it did not take, and he died of kidney failure. He was 53 years old. And the other case that I'm aware of is Julian Beck. Julian Beck played the iconic Reverend Kane.
Mm.
Um, and he was, in my opinion, an amazing actor because at the time that he was shooting Poltergeist 2, he had stomach cancer. And
Whoa.
so that kind of emaciated look that you see when he's up in Craig T. Nelson's face, that may not be Hollywood. That might actually be his condition that we're witnessing.
That's
And yet,
insane. What a curse. This is wild.
I know. But I was just impressed that he was able to take what would be a career ender in Hollywood and make it work for him. He made it part of Kane's persona
Yeah.
as being, because this is my complaint of the franchise as a whole, is we never get a consistent explanation as to what he was.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I mean, when in Poltergeist 2, which is when we're introduced to Kane, it's not that objectionable in terms of continuity because we knew that he was, or rather, we assume he's a shapeshifter of sorts
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
because Tangina describes him as taking the shape of a child when Carol Ann is on the other side in the first movie,
Right.
a child that lies to her, stranger danger.
Right. Right.
And but to an adult, he comes off as the beast. And then that's kind of explained away in the second one, where Taylor says he takes many forms, but that was him. But even when Taylor and Tangina are explaining in the second film, it's still not a cohesive line of thought,
Interesting.
in the sense that I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. First, there's the scene in the living room where Taylor describes him as being possessed by a demon,
Hmm.
which makes sense because in the first movie, what he was doing, what we assume was him, was definitely demonic looking. I
Absolutely.
mean, when I saw the first movie and Tangina says to us it is the beast, I just assumed that was the devil.
Yeah. Right.
Of course. Of course, then you have to step back and you think, well, the devil? Why is he, if he's building bridges into this world or is in some kind of invisible soul stealing operation, why is he focusing on this one kid?
Mm.
Because even with her being a psychic, in theory, psychics in this world are a dime a dozen. I mean, he never tries for Tangina. In the second one, he does try for Diane, but only as an afterthought. It's
Yeah.
Carol Ann's the primary focus. Um, and so that lack of continuity, and it kind of goes into negatives as well. I'm sorry to keep heading there, but
We're about to bust into that one too.
yeah. But anyway, but to get back to the Curse of Poltergeist, because I think I veered off a little bit in admiration for Julian Beck's
Absolute
performance.
and well deserved.
Yes. Um, Beck died before the movie was released. So, and you notice if you watch the second movie, he kind of disappears. I mean, we see him represented in prosthetics and in the 1980s claymation when he reveals himself as the Beast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but he died before they could. I don't remember if he died before they finished or what, but he passed on. He didn't live to see the finished product. And he also filmed an episode of Miami Vice, where again, he played an awesome villain.
Yeah.
And the episode aired 13 days after his passing.
That's
And
wild.
And I encourage everybody listening to YouTube the clip of him in Miami Vice, because the monologue that his character gives is still very much relevant with regards to, foreign policy, immigration, our war on drugs.
Oh, I bet.
And,
Yeah.
and it seemed to be right up Beck's alley, because Beck, when I researched him, is in I believe it's the Theater Hall of Fame for his work in what was called the anarchist theater. He was an anarchist.
Oh,
I
wow.
don't believe he believed in capitalism or in religion. And so naturally, those are his two perhaps most famous roles, playing a capitalist banker on Miami Vice, and of course, a reverend who became the Beast, whatever this is supposed to mean in
Yeah.
the grand scheme of the franchise.
Yeah, and I can see those themes running throughout this film too. I was really struck by how honest this plot is.
Mm,
And maybe I want to tie this into the positive section. I really like that the movie kind of takes the position that Carol Ann is like just straight up correct, right? Like she's lived through two
mhm.
movies of this already. There's no reason
Yeah,
to doubt this little girl, and yet the whole movie is doubting her. Every adult in a position of power will not recognize the inherent truth that she carries, and then
yeah,
it's at the cost of a religious antagonist. And it's like, it really feels like they're trying to say something here about the kids having something important to say, the adults being too dumb to listen to it, and it being because of these like evil religious figures that are,
yeah,
clouding people's vision. And it's like, you can see, I love that underlying truth in that plot of like, yeah, if you're going to get to a third movie about a character from the last two, the only way to really make this story interesting is if nobody believes her.
yeah. And to add on to what you were just saying, something that I find hilarious when I'm watching the original Poltergeist, you're seeing Joe Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson getting ready for bed, and He's reading the memoir of Ronald Reagan while she's in the background preparing two joints.
Right.
And whilst nowadays you can be a Republican and support recreational marijuana, back then you couldn't. I
Right.
mean, maybe you could in your personal beliefs, but legally and as far as platforming and messaging, you absolutely couldn't. It
Right.
was a contradiction. And
Absolutely.
so, and I'm very curious. I would be curious to know what Craig T. Nelson thinks of this in retrospect, because it's my understanding he is a Republican. I remember during the Obama years, he was on Glenn Beck. I don't know if anybody remembers him, and please do not look up what he's doing now.
Yeah. No, I'll see you on that one.
Yeah, but Craig T. Nelson, and I think this was as the Tea Party was entering Congress or had already entered Congress. He was weighing in on the debate over food stamps and other programs for the poor. And what kind of got him in trouble was he said something to the effect of, I was on food stamps, I was on whatever. Nobody helped me out when I was starting out in Hollywood. And it's like, dude, that's the definition of help.
Right.
Um,
Wild.
and it's like, I mean, it's one thing if you were on it and in your opinion, the system didn't work.
Mm.
Or if you were on it and you noticed a lot of people who were but shouldn't have been. And I'm not saying that that's the norm in the
Oh
system,
yeah, totally.
just to be clear on that. But it's one thing to have an opinion over whether or not you think it works, but then to benefit from it and say,
I
well,
did it
nobody
on
helped
my
me.
own. Oh my
It's,
god.
it's like, no, you didn't. I mean, if you wish you hadn't done it, just say you wish you hadn't done it. Don't say you did it and then didn't do it in the same
Right.
sentence.
Absolutely. Oh my God. Well, okay. So along these lines, then, Julian Beck seems to be espousing these ideas. The movie seems to espouse. The series seems to really take these ideas. What are you taking away from this movie that you, plot wise and I guess impact wise, that you want to keep? What really impacts you about this story that you want to keep around?
So, the story, if we're talking about Poltergeist 3 specifically,
Hmm.
not a whole lot.
Okay.
Um, to me, I'll put it this way. When I watched the interview with the screenwriters and the interview with Nancy Allen when she did the promo work for when it was on Shout, um, what I view it as it was a great concept that never arrived, that
Mm,
never visually it was executed brilliantly, I thought, because they didn't do the claymation. I mean, by this time in the 80s, effects had improved, but they were nothing you'd write home about.
sure.
I know everybody's complaining about CGI nowadays, but it's like at least you're not being shown a clay monster and being told you're supposed to be afraid of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and they said what they were aiming for was a through the looking glass kind of concept with the
Oh,
mirrors.
interesting. Okay.
And Nancy Allen said in the shoot, the hardest part was memorizing the choreography because for the mirror effect to work, they had to pay attention to every place they were standing so that they were not casting reflections, but
Mm.
other actors were. And that concept I thought was just perfect. And it looks visually beautiful in the sense that you feel that this is a haunting. And the building is also, which anybody who doesn't know, the building was the John Hancock Center,
Hmm.
the John Hancock skyscraper in Chicago.
Yeah.
And the building in this movie does take on an identity, so to speak. But for all the reasons we have just discussed and will be discussing, it just never arrived.
Yeah.
It's the first 20 minutes of the film are a great setup, but it got to a point where it felt like nobody knew what they were doing and it just said, well, all right, well, we'll just run around screaming and call it horror.
Right. Yeah. There's so much and then storytelling that happens across the back half of the movie specifically, and it's a great setup, like a skyscraper, a high rise. What a great location. You know, Die Hard is going to come out a month after this movie and do exactly the
Mm.
same thing. You know what I mean? Like we're obsessed with these skyscraper stories back in the 80s. And so I love the setting. The mirrors and the big glass panels in a skyscraper are great visual, you know, kind of tie togethers. All of that works for me. The have to not to switch subjects too harshly, but have you heard about this new movie, Night Swim?
I have seen the Instagram postings for it. I am intrigued. I have not seen it yet because I'm one of those OCD people who prefers to reserve horror for Halloween.
Oh, sure.
Um, just because every time it's Halloween, it feels like there's nothing to watch. I mean, you go to the movie theater. Those of us who still do go to the movie theater, I try, despite the movie house near where I live having closed.
Oh,
And that was not a independent mom and pop place. That was a corporate. That was
wow.
Regal.
Wow.
So I was PO'd at that. Um, but when I look up what's showing at Halloween, it's either something cheap, something you can guess the ending just by looking at the trailer, or just something that is being re-aired, but you either don't want to see it or rather I don't, other
Mm,
people might. And it's just I'm always disappointed. And I'm also disappointed that when we do have things coming out at Halloween, either they're not of substance, they're
yeah.
not, they're just all about the scares, no story, or just nothing that has a sense of adventure, if you will. So let's say it's Halloween, you're not necessarily looking for horror, if that makes sense, but you are looking for supernatural adventure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there was a time, there was always something on offer, whether on television or in
Sure.
theaters. But now it feels like no. And I see horror movies coming out sometime, and it's like, can somebody please tell Hollywood how to read a calendar? I mean, because they're dropping this, and if they had just held on to it for maybe 2 months, they would have a Halloween release.
Right.
And if the film's no good, at least you got the Halloween crowd.
Yeah, yeah,
That
exactly.
that to this day does not make sense to me. I'm not a marketing person. I went for anthropology, folklore specifically,
Oh,
but
wow.
it's just. I mean, to give another example of Hollywood and their calendar crisis, not real crisis, my opinion of a crisis.
Sure, sure.
You have that movie, Bros, which was,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, and it did not do well. And people were saying, well, it would have done better if you'd done streaming rather than a movie theater release. And there may be some truth to that, but frankly, a movie like this, you drop it at one of two times. Sorry, three times. One, you can drop it at Valentine's Day and try to get the Valentine's crowd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Two, you can drop it at Pride Month at any time you want,
True.
because then it's a given. Or three, and this, um, I know your fellow, not your fellow podcaster, Nando from Nando V
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Movies,
yeah. I love Nando.
does not like this person, but the vlogger Grace Randolph from Beyond the Trailer,
Oh, sure.
she said if you have, once I think she said this, if you have a movie and you do not know how it's going to fare, you can always drop it in March because it seems like nothing big comes out in March.
No,
The
yeah,
superhero,
it's true.
the, su- the superhero films are always reserved for summer, Christmas, Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
likewise, which is interesting because Dune 2 is out now.
Yes, it
So
is. Well, and that's the thing. Like you see the market's kind of reacting to our change. Like Deadpool coming out and being an R-rated gangbusters release in a dump month upset the whole business. Like they really threw everyone into a tizzy. So now it's like, wait a second, maybe these aren't dump months. Maybe this is like the golden opportunity to put out something really good and then just sweep it. And so you'll see that kind of move happening more often, I think now.
it can be because if memory serves, the original Hunger Games was a March drop,
Yep.
and it ended up becoming the unexpected hit. And hindsight 2020, I think that was an excellent strategic move because the biggest thing working against it was Twilight at the time.
Yeah.
Because the Twilight fans, and I was never into the books. I liked the concept, but when I went to see the movie itself, Bella was just, I'm sorry, I couldn't sympathize with this character, and I think a lot of other people couldn't, and I think that might have been a problem for Kristen Stewart coming out of that franchise,
Mm.
and I feel bad for her in that regard.
Well, and
Um,
especially the way she got pitted against Jennifer Lawrence as the other lead. You know what I mean? Like
yes.
the very different kinds of charisma there, and it's kind of unfair to put them against each other. I bring up Night Swim because I'm trying to swing back around to the haunted pool in the
Oh, yes.
skyscraper. Night Swim is one of those movies, like you're saying, where it is all about the scares and not about the plot, and it's a haunted pool. And I watching this was like, oh wow, they literally took like a piece of Poltergeist 3 and turned it into a whole movie. That's how starved we are for horror movies right now.
And also, I don't know if you were ever a fan of Are You Afraid of the Dark, but The Tale of Dead Man's Float
Yeah,
was
yeah,
about a
yeah.
haunted pool. And in my opinion, a better feature design. I mean, I haven't seen the movie you're talking about yet, so I can't say this. But the creature design for Dead Man's Float was so horrifying to look at for me as a kid. I'm surprised that the execs at Nickelodeon said yes. But the show was shot in Canada, and Canadians, and not to stereotype Canadians, have always kind of had a more, shall we say, advanced sense of things than we have
Yeah, yeah, that
historically.
tracks.
Yeah. Um, though sadly, some of the American trends are making its way north of the border. I'm sorry to
Well,
say.
our entertainment is all around the world, so we're influencing whether we want to or not.
Yeah. Anyway, um, but yeah, it's like March for me in the movie business is kind of like the test tube. If
Mm,
you don't know how it's going to fare, that's the time to probably let it out.
yeah, yeah. I think that's fair. Let's work our way through positives to the other end here. Do you have anything on your list that you want to bring up for any more positives? I know we kind of dove into your like your overarching what you like out of it, but anything you want to highlight as like worth the entry? Do you recommend people watch this movie?
I would say it's worth watching just to know what we're talking about. Um, uh, Film rescue notwithstanding. Um, Visually, for the visuals, it's worth watching. It's worth watching if you do admire Heather O'Rourke for
Mm,
what she accomplished in her very short life
yeah.
and just to see her body of work in this franchise. Um, Apart from the sentimental aspect, I wouldn't mind if somebody tried to fix what they did. I mean, it doesn't have to be a reboot of Poltergeist 3 because I can't think of a single studio that's signing on for that.
This
Um,
almost feels like you could do this story unattached from the Poltergeist series too.
you
But
could.
for the argument of our pitch later, it will be in the Poltergeist series to be clear. But I
Yeah.
think this story is very functional on its own. I could almost see it having come out as its own horror movie. You know, Tower of Terror or something like that. You can almost
Uh,
see its independent design.
Tower of Terror actually was a Disney TV movie, and I think it could find its way onto the show.
There you
I'm
go.
sorry to say.
I
No
might have to
offense.
check one out.
Yeah, no offense to Steve Guttenberg and Kirsten Dunst, but it's like that series that not series. It wasn't a series. It was a movie based on Disney's Ride, The Tower of Terror, and
Uh,
uh, if you're looking for something for your kids to watch, it's good. But if you're looking for like a something on Hocus Pocus level, the original, not the sequel, um, just go watch something else. I'm sorry.
so negative wise, What's bugging you here, Cody?
In one word, Caroline. Um, that notwithstanding, and this was what you were alluding to earlier, Dr. Seaton. This is it's not even good as a secondary villain. I mean, he is the most unwanted character in this movie, I think,
Mm,
because he's annoying. His ideas are just are more absurd than what Carol Ann is trying to tell him.
yeah,
I mean, um, like the scene where he's accusing her of mass hypnosis. It's like, dude, you just hypnotized her. And also, what he was doing is, in my opinion, borderline child abuse because she's
oh yeah,
screaming when she's in the well, not borderline, it is child abuse because she's screaming. She's clearly suffering from PTSD, and he's bringing it up and on display for investors, no less,
right,
on a double sided mirror. And also, her parents are not there.
right,
And I'm not a psychologist. My mom has a degree in psychology, but it's like common sense alone would tell you that if you're treating a child who was visibly through a trauma, her parents and or family or legal guardian have to be there for when you're doing this because this is a 12-year-old. This is not someone who can put words to trauma or has the mental capacity to revisit trauma.
right, right.
So the fact that he's doing this and the investors are like, huh, interesting. It's like, you should not want $1 of your money in this asinine school that is supposed to be for smart kids.
Right.
I
It was so frustrating to watch. Like he's such a quack, and
I know.
like we're seeing this little kid isolated and alone in this situation. And I'm like screaming for an adult to do something. Like I think that's why we have Tangina later on is like to bring that
Mm,
level of like, okay, hold up, we need a real grown up here in the room for a second.
I know. And like, for instance, and you just mentioned how lonely she is. I
Yeah.
mean, he asks her point blank, if you had to describe it in one word, what would you say you're feeling right now? And she said, lonely, I guess. And he just stands there and goes, lonely. Okay, we'll go with that. And it's like, I, I, I had words for it last night when I was rewatching the film, but it's like, now the stupidity of that.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're trying to, according to you, she is this compulsive liar. She is a manipulator. She is capable of mass hypnosis, which is, by the way, mass hypnosis to the degree that he's describing it sounds just as science fiction based
Oh
as
yeah.
her being a psychic.
Yeah, no, he's talking about something there that is like he no one else in his field is speaking that way in at this era. Like he is often the conspiracy field. He's not talking about reality, especially from a 12-year-old, especially from a 12-year-old.
Yeah. And as I was watching Seaton and his so called character development, and this is another thing that kind of annoys me, is the scene where Tangina calls him at home, which is another negative. Why is she even calling him? Why does she want him involved in any of this?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I get her wanting to give him a what for, but not on a plane and not when she's proactively cleaning up his mess.
Mm.
Um, the only way I can see, and this is not in my pitch, but it could have been a pitch if this was a writer's room situation.
And I love that
Um,
setup. Absolutely. Hit me with it.
um, a possible idea is if she needed to figure out what he did and how he did it.
Yeah,
And
if
that is,
that would imply that he would know what he's doing.
yeah, well, what I mean is she would ask him to recount
Okay, yeah,
how
yeah,
this all started, and she would have to figure out where it was that button he didn't know he pressed was pressed.
yeah.
In
Interesting.
terms in terms of, again, cleaning up his mess because Kane was supposed to be over and done for. Yet here he is again.
Yeah.
And this is another negative I have, so to speak, is that we're not really getting any time with Kane in that
Mm,
we're just getting a body double in prosthetics and a disembodied voice. We're not getting cohesive dialogue. We're not getting development. We're not
yeah. 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 Yeah.
nothing. And I looked up who was playing Kane many months ago just to see, did he have a take on it or anything?
Hmm.
And it looks as though he was played by two people, one as the body double and then one providing the voice, and that's if memory serves. And so we're not even getting um, a cohesive character in
Yeah.
Kane.
Yeah.
Now, this is a second possible direction they could have taken is if they can't find an actor who can live up to Julian Beck and get the audience to adopt him as the new Kane, rather than do this sort of not a real word, but phantomization, if you will,
Okay.
of the character, um, why not try to make Seaton the vessel for Kane? Why not a physical possession?
It's right there. It's right. Yes, absolutely. I know exactly what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we already hate Seaton, so there's no love loss if he dies, which he does, and it's the least satisfying death of the movie.
Truly.
Um, Also, another negative, and this is nitpicking, is how did his body decay that fast?
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
I mean, he should not be, I mean, he should be white with a frozen face of terror on his face. And this is another thing. The scene with his wife, it's like, I'm sorry, that is not a heterosexual man. that is, that is, um, that is your typical 1980s fake setup marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
and it's not just the scene where he leaves and he says, "Put dinner on low and don't forget the paprika." It's like, tell me you're a stereotype without telling me you're a stereotype, basically. And also just when he's hypnotizing Scott and going, "What puddle?" It's, could you be any more of a detached whatever? I mean,
Right.
I'm speechless at how dumb this character is. And it's unfortunate that Jesse and Hope are not here because I'd be curious to see how they'd rip him.
Yeah, no, I can imagine the rippage that Seaton could get from them. I mean, it's hard to watch what is like a great I guess what are we asking for here? Are we asking that they had leaned into these things more and made it more apparent, or are we trying to like uh rewrite and do something else here?
Uh, with Seaton, there are I as a viewer, this is my demand is make him a character that is in any way important to the overall story.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, clearly he's involved. Clearly he's the root cause of all of this. So either you can make him a reluctant ally after Tangina is killed, and I loathe that idea because he's that annoying to watch.
Totally.
Um, or you can make him a villain and or accomplice of Kane.
Yeah.
And this isn't in my pitch, but they would have been better off, as I said before, to make him physically possessed by Kane. And that way Kane has a presence. And they did that in the second film because I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing they ran out of footage of Beck that they could use.
Mm.
Hence the Craig T. Nelson possession, where he drinks the worm and the tequila
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
is then talking and acting like Kane, which I don't think too fondly of Craig T. Nelson as an actor. And this has nothing to do with his beliefs at all
Sure.
whatsoever. Um, but I will give him his props. He did a good job of playing Kane. I mean, he was a proper villain when he's possessed. He was misogynistic. We hated him, but at the exact same time, we know it's not Steven.
Yeah,
We
yeah, yeah,
know
yeah.
that. Um, so we could have done so since we know it's within Kane's ability to do this, he could have done it with Seaton, and then we have Kane in the movie proper. But Seaton is a useless character in my
Mm,
view, and I think the reason he's even there is number one to create an explanation, though not a good one, as to why Kane is still haunting this little girl, and number two, um, forgot number two. Give me a minute. And number two, they just needed someone to kill
yeah, yeah.
because he's the only character that stays dead apart from Tangina. But, because Tangina saves the day, though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Um, uh, really, nobody dies. It's up in the air whether or not Scott is still on the other side, but Seaton's the only confirmed kill we have.
Yeah, the Wikipedia says Scott is seemingly released from the other side, and then that's the last time he's mentioned.
Yeah.
That's kind of. How would you describe what the movie is presenting as the reason why these hauntings are why Kane is now in the building? Like I feel like it was basically they were just talking about her too much. Was kind of my pull. How would you describe it?
So I don't know if they worked with anybody from the original two, but if they had, I'm sure, or rather, I hope, somebody at some point said, "You can't do this." The part where Seaton says, "When we talk about things, they go away," and then Carol Ann corrects him. She says, "No, they happen when you remember them." And then later, Tangina says, "You made her remember. That's how we found her." So that doesn't work because it doesn't line up with the final battle with
Mm-hmm.
Kane in the second one. It also doesn't line up with something that Taylor said. When Taylor said, there's no, I can't remember what he specifically said, but he basically said, you shouldn't forget things. There's no power in it, that you should remember things and learn from them and grow
Right.
from them.
Right.
So they're pitching Carol Ann's supposed implied amnesia as though that was the solution. When Taylor outright said you shouldn't do that, so already we have a continuity problem
Yeah. Okay. I follow.
on an X-Men level continuity problem. The original, not the one that Marvel's trying to fix, and I hope they do. um, so we don't really have an explanation other than the fact that they just changed the continuity and hoped no one would notice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild that we're missing that enough that it's even lost within the film somewhat. You know what I mean? Like where
Yeah,
I wish it were more clear. Because I think that could be part of the fun of it too. Like there's a Ghostbusters element in here that I feel like is a little untapped. Just
definitely.
there's opportunity here. I'm excited to get into the pitch. I think that's what it is. I'm seeing all these like great ideas that could be laid out, and then man, maybe even updated. I'm seeing like I could see a really cool Blumhouse or like A24 style spiritual successor to Poltergeist 3. You know what I mean? Just about a little psychic girl being stuck in a terrible situation in a tower, and the mirrors and the pull and all that. You want to keep all that stuff because you like mirrors in this movie feel like they directly inspired the scares in Mirrors, the Kiefer Sutherland film. Like it feels like the bits in this movie have kind of broken off into the horror fandom. So I wanna keep all that like good DNA around.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned the Ghostbuster element because, and this goes back to the notes I have on the Curse of Poltergeist. Zelda Rubinstein, who plays Tangina, spoke out quite blatantly about the curse. She did not like the idea of it. She didn't like it being talked about.
Mm.
Um, I remember the interview with the screenwriter said that Zelda was either atheist or agnostic. Um, I would vote for agnostic because I remember an interview where she talked as though she was open to the idea of psychics as a
Sure.
real thing. Anyway, but she openly referred to it as crap. Um, More politely, mind you. She had this very ladylike
Oh yeah,
demeanor to her, which I
yeah,
loved. But she had hinted that she wanted the story to continue, the franchise to continue.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so, since you mentioned this Ghostbuster element, I don't know what talks were going on at the time before or even after Heather O'Rourke died, but my impression was that she had hoped for a Tangina spinoff of some kind, which would have
yeah.
been wonderful if Samson, I apologize for forgetting his last name, even though I said it but a few moments ago. But the gentleman who played Taylor, um, he was a great actor. He was in One Floor Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Hmm.
You could have made standalone films about him as Taylor, and it would have been groundbreaking, I feel, because to this day, we still don't have adequate Native American representation in
Yeah,
cinema.
yeah,
There's been talk about maybe making Thunderbird a character in X-Men, but even then, it's not a lead. It's not, it's
yeah.
also not through the lens of this culture that
Right.
we basically survived a genocide. And so to have that representation, not to mention, Taylor's just a badass.
Yeah.
He's not intimidated by anything. So that could have been a merger, if you will, between the horror genre and a um, action hero.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Those jumps are so logical. You even watch John Carpenter go from like horror into action horror into,
oh
that
yes.
like that it's a very movable genre.
Last night I was listening to your the film rescue for Escape from LA. So it's very ironic that you bring that up.
Well, he's a huge influence on my work. John Carpenter is like he's the
Oh
man
yes.
to me because I'm a musician as well. So the idea of like scoring something that I shoot is it really endearing to me. He makes low budget, really fun, high concept stuff, and that's right up my alley. And then to like top it all off, my first film ever is like a reference to him and Kevin Smith. So he's near and dear to my heart.
He turned horror into fucking poetry
Yeah,
from where I sit. I
yeah.
mean, if anybody here has seen the original Fog, then you know that the aesthetic is beautiful. The opening with the quote from Edgar Allan Poe really sets the tone as to
Yeah.
how serious this is.
Yeah.
And and of course the closing scene with Adrienne Barbeau closing her broadcast, saying "Look for the fog." It's haunting in of itself, and a lot of people that I spoke to about the film years ago, and this is like back in high school, talked about it and said, "Yeah, that was based on a Stephen King story, wasn't it?" And I looked it up; it wasn't. And
Oh.
so the fact that you could get that conflation, I think, speaks that he is the Stephen King of cinema horror.
Yeah.
There's no Stephen King equivalent in literature. There's only ever going to be one,
Right. No, yeah,
and
absolutely.
because I'm from Maine, I have to say that.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's some
um,
pride there for sure.
yeah, and but what disappoints me, and you pointed this out, I think, in the Escape from LA rescue, uh, it's like his early work is his best work.
Mm,
It never really got any better, or rather, it never really went back to its roots, I'll say.
yeah.
Because the original Halloween is also pretty good. I mean, compared to any other slasher film, it's good.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, it just got annihilated in the sequel. Not the sequel, the sequels.
Right.
I mean, the fact that I never saw them, but I read up on them.
Sure.
The fact that Michael now has this psychic niece, and it's like, dude, you don't need to make it supernatural.
Yeah.
He's, I mean, if you want to raise the bar, just bring in psychology to it, like real psychology. Is there an actual killer that whose MO he's replicating, or
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera? And I haven't seen the new Halloween. I've seen only one movie in the new Halloween trilogy that Jamie Lee Curtis
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
produced.
yeah, yeah.
I appreciate that that was the build up to a three-part story. I haven't seen the other two, so I can't say whether I would or wouldn't like it.
Mm.
But the first one, I was just like, why am I here? I
Yeah,
mean, I mean, yes, you raised the bar by showing his killing spree, such as it was, that he's no longer discriminating between kids, mothers, etc.
sure.
Um, but anyway, I'm veering off into a different rescue. But it was like overall, it's like, why am I here? You're not even making the kills entertaining.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and getting away from what Carpenter did in that first movie, it's really the first one's very reserved. It is not a
mm,
as aggressive as I think the Rob Zombie movies get, or even as in your face as the I want to call them the Danny McBride versions since he was so involved with those. The Rough House Pictures, that's who did them.
yeah,
David Gordon Green.
yeah.
I like them, but they're yeah, it's not the Carpenter stuff. And I would love to put some Carpenter stuff into this pitch too. Let's hear your pitch. We're an hour in. I'm sure we'll have
All
other
right.
things that we bring up as positives and negatives across this, but let's dive into your
So,
pitch because you're a super fan. You've got the continuity down. You've got great ideas for what you want to do with these characters. And you're a folklore anthropology expert. I'm just gonna let you run with it. Spin me some yarn here, Cody.
okay, so I kind of got the idea for this pitch not just from watching the source material, but I also got the idea for the pitch from the then trailer for the New Mutants because I
Mm-hmm.
thought, I mean, obviously, I've seen the movie. It could have been better.
It was
Um,
all right.
I mean, it's a that's a different episode.
Yeah,
But I liked the idea of a haunted boarding school with an administration that's in on whatever's going on.
mm,
So I thought, how do we bring some of that into Poltergeist 3?
love
Well,
it.
we already have the setup with this academy that we really don't know anything about. I
Yeah,
mean, it's being run by a quack, as we discussed, but we don't really know what kind of kids they're seeking out,
yeah,
um, which would have been another negative. It's like, what is the school's mission? I mean, we know why we have an idea as to why Carol Ann is there, but it's like, anyway,
yeah. It's so vague. Yeah,
we're
it's
so
so
off
vague.
that. So I make this in my pitch. I rescue the school. I named it the school. What did I name it? The O'Leary School for High Achievement.
Okay, that's nice
Um,
and specific.
I almost considered calling it the O'Rourke School in tribute to Heather, but I don't know that it's a compliment considering where this story is going to go.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe we save that one.
Yeah. So if her sister is listening to this and is still with us, it's like you can just message whomever and we'll adjust accordingly.
Right.
Um, but the O'Leary School for High Achievement, and it is a school for psychic kids.
Okay.
So we begin, well, actually, we begin with the credit rollout, and we're looking at this. The camera would be zooming in on this little parchment that appears to be a map of Chicago in the 1800s. And
Interesting.
as it backs up, we see the building that Carol Ann is living in, built right in the center of these 1800 map, which makes no sense. For the record, the building is a fictitious building. It will not be the Hancock Center
Okay. Okay. Good to know.
because I don't know that it would jive with the historical elements I'm writing in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the camera then pans down as the final credit rolls out, and we see a date. It is the date of the Great Chicago Fire. So this is a little mystery for the audience. So we begin. Carol Ann is at this academy for psychic kids, and she's older. Instead of being 12, I age her up to 18
Okay.
so that it makes sense. Because really, this character has got to grow. in terms of experience.
I think that's fair. Yeah, we've had two movies with her as a kid, seeing her next phase, her teenage years, her young adult years. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm on board.
Yeah. So she's going to this academy. We don't really know why she's there. That's to be revealed. As before, she's staying with her Aunt Pat and her Uncle Bruce. They are not a biological relation or a marital relation. It's explained that Pat is actually Diane, Carol Ann's mother's old friend from college. And she's staying with them and their son, Tommy. Tommy's about 12 years old.
Okay.
Um, she gets along with them, and Pat is more affectionate to her in this movie than she was in the actual one. That was
Yeah,
another thing.
kind of
It's
odd,
like,
right?
why do you hate this girl? You seem to like her.
She's
And
done
then
nothing to you.
exactly. And it's like that story would have made more sense if she was sister-in-law rather than sister.
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
Um,
I follow.
and also if they had gone through, if they had made her a relation of Stephen rather than Diane.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so they're just friends, and so she calls her Aunt Pat as a term of endearment.
Oh, that's cute. I like that.
Um, yeah, Pat is very affectionate, very supportive, the total opposite of what we get in this film. But she notices, she being Carol Ann, notices that Bruce is ignoring her. And I mean, like, not even, oh, I'm neglecting you. It's like she says hi to him and he barely notices she's there. Like he's toning out or something. So then what we have is she's going to school, she's living with them, she's very lonely, but she's still seeing Kane in the mirror, like we see in this film.
Oh, wow. Okay, so haunted
Um,
after all this time. Interesting.
yeah. And we have a flashback to her with Tangina, where Tangina is telling her the story of the necklace, how it was a gift from Taylor, and how it'll be Carol Ann's one day when she's ready. And Carol Ann asks her about Kane. Why is she still seeing him? And Tangina in this version explains that Kane refused to go into the light. That's just how profound his pride is. He'll eventually dissipate and leave her alone. She said, but she's going to be prone to these kind of encounters because of who she is.
Mm,
And this is not what Carol Ann wants to hear.
yeah.
And so it's implied that she enrolled at this academy because she wants a normal life.
Yeah.
Um, and it works because Diane, in the previous film, that's all she wanted for Carol Ann, to the point she was ignoring obvious signs that the kid is clairvoyant.
Right. Okay, so some generational lessons needing to be learned here. Got it.
Yeah. So she's at the academy and she doesn't have any friends. There's this jock who basically makes a pass at her. His name is Jason, and she's so disturbed that she runs away from him. And it upsets her. And then Jason's brother, who is Scott, recycled from the original,
Very nice. Okay.
um, says Jason's all bark and no bite. And then he goes, I hear you can talk to ghosts. And she at first thinks that this is a setup for a tease. And he goes, no, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Everybody here's got a gift. He points to a girl who's moving a Cheerio without touching it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She's a telekinetic. Her name is Heather. Then he points to, I'm also recycling Donna, Laura Flynn Boyle's character. In this version, Donna is a student at the academy and she is a pyrokinetic.
Okay.
At first, Carol Ann's impressed, but then he says, don't worry, she's not a Carrie child. She she can light candles and whatnot, but she can't set a building on fire. Then we move on to Jasper. And this I actually looked up. This is a completely random psychic gift. I forget what it's called, but the psychic ability to know how to speak a language,
Okay.
having never taken a lesson. And I thought, okay, interesting. And so I didn't want to make any students all powerful because, it's like why would anyone mess with them if that was the case?
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Jasper's ability is he can speak any language, having only heard it. And then we meet another kid who seems a little lonely, like Carol Ann, and Scott explains that his name is Mason and he's a postcog. He can see
Okay.
the past just by touching an item from the past.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, so that's the setup. And in the notes that I wrote, which I'm not referencing because I went a little, I basically wrote an entire manuscript. So,
Sometimes you just got to get it out, right?
yeah. So, after she's finally making friends and feeling a little less of a freak, she goes home up to the pool to do some laps.
I'm so glad you
And
kept the
while,
pool. I'm so glad you
yeah.
kept the pool.
And so she notices that there's a mirror ceiling above the pool, and she just goes onto her back and looks at her reflection. But she's noticing her reflection is making a slight smile back at her. And she's a little disturbed by that. And then suddenly she hears a 12-year-old boy's voice. It's Tommy saying, "Dinner's ready. She needs to come back downstairs." As she's coming back downstairs, Tommy is telling her that he wants to know what was up with the old man. And she goes, "What old man?" And he said, "The one that was in the mirror, the one that we saw on the way to school." She figures out that Kane's talking to Tommy, and
Oh, shit.
she tells him to stay away from him. He's dangerous. And if he ever comes to him, he has to come to her. Tommy agrees. And they go to dinner again. It's an uncomfortable dinner. Pat's the perfect host, but Bruce, again, is just staring off into space. Dude's not even acknowledging her.
Mm.
A little later, she's watching TV with Tommy eating Toastums. I'm sorry, I got to do something with this character, so I figured
Absolutely.
Toastums, even though that was just straight up product placement.
Why not? I mean, why not,
Yeah,
right? Get us
yeah,
that ad money.
yeah. And she's eating a Toastum, and Tommy's teasing her because he thinks Pop Tarts are better. And she challenges him to a taste test. So she goes into the kitchen to get some Pop Tarts and some Toastum samples. And Bruce immediately sees her and is in shock. And he goes, "Who are you? What are you doing in my home?" And it's like a person with who's gone senile. And she calms him down and she says, "Bruce, it's me, Carol Ann. I'm Stephen and Diane's kid. I've been staying with you for however long she's been there."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He, rolls his eyes go back and forth looking for the memory of that. And he's like, "Oh, I'm very sorry." And he goes back to his room,
Whoa.
and she doesn't know what to make of this. Something is clearly wrong here. Next day, she's going back to the academy. A neighbor bumps into her, and she says, "Excuse me." And the neighbor turns around. The irises look like they're disappearing, like they're going gray.
Oh, whoa.
And Carol Ann just assumes she's disabled or something, and she says, I'm so sorry. Never mind." Um, on the way to school, she still hears Kane kind of whispering, but it's faint. He's
Mm.
not very strong. Then she goes to the school, and the teacher is going on a lecture about, I think in my notes I wrote Beethoven, how he wrote all this brilliant music despite the fact that he was physically deaf.
Mm.
The explanation being that he used vibrations to compose the music. And she said, "But what if Beethoven had something else? What if he didn't need to hear, as a clairvoyant can simply hear the voice of one's mind?"
Mm.
And so arguing that Beethoven was basically psychic.
That's funny. I like that.
Um,
That's cool.
the teacher offers no evidence of this, I should just point out.
Sure.
And then we see Dr. Seaton talking to the investors once again. He gives some dog and pony show explanation of what the school hopes to achieve. And
Is
then we
is
cut back.
Seaton aware of the kid's mental powers? Just for
He
clarity.
is.
Okay. Okay. Is he showing that to the investors, or is this something he's keeping to himself?
He's showing it to the investors. So when we're introduced to Seaton, it's through the double way mirror
Okay. Right. Right.
in the
Right.
teacher's lecture. And then he proceeds to lead them out of the double room, excuse me, the observation room,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then into the hallway where he's, explaining what the school's about, what they hope to achieve. He might reiterate some notes from the original about parapsychology,
Okay.
how it's so novel that we don't even have a measurement for it
Right.
or what the measurement should be. So he's making the school seem less like a fringe idea.
Yeah.
Um, and also, he's explaining what the academic standards are, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
Basically, a typical pitch from the troubled teen industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, not to marginalize that, it's a serious problem. Anyway,
Absolutely.
so we cut back to the classroom, and the teacher wants to do a new exercise. She wants to do an exercise in divination. So she starts handing out mirrors to everybody.
Oh.
And she says, clear your minds. Imagine that it was water. Imagine that you want to put your hand up to the water. You prick a ripple in the surface. What does the ripple show you? And everybody's, just being snarky, being whatever.
Yeah.
But Carol Ann notices that her fingers are going through the glass, and
Whoa.
she starts to panic. And um, she pulls her hand out, and the glass breaks. And so does the glass in the other mirrors that the students are holding.
Whoa. Okay.
And Mason, our postcog, soon as the glass breaks in his mirror, he runs out of the room screaming like he's something just traumatized him.
Okay.
And everybody's looking at Carol Ann, and it's a look as kind of like, what did you do to him? And as soon as she's about to try and explain that she doesn't know what happened, the phonogram, the old record player, starts going on all by itself, and it's playing the hymn God is in his holy temple,
Oh my
the
God.
hymn that Kane's always singing.
Yeah.
And she panics and she runs out of the room, runs to the girls' room. She throws water on her face, and when she looks up, Kane is staring at her. Now, if this had been the direction that the 80s wanted, that the filmmakers had wanted to go, I don't know what they would have done, because Beck was dead and buried and could
Sure.
not be brought back. So, assuming they figured out how to MacGyver that, we would see Kane be just as terrifying as ever. And she asks him point blank what he wants. And he says, I want what I've always wanted, darling. Apologies to Beck fans if they object to my impression. He goes, what I want is for you to come to the other side with me. And then she goes, no. And then he goes, Carol Ann, I'm of no harm to you anymore. I'm all washed up, darling. All of the spirits have gone over to the other side. I can feel myself dissolving as we speak. And then he goes, please, Carol Ann, have mercy. Don't let me go into the void. And then
Whoa.
she goes, this is your fault. It is your problem. If you don't want to die like this, then go into the light. And then she walks away from him, and he goes, Carol Ann, come back, come back. And she slams the door, and when she does, it cracks the mirror, and
Whoa.
he's gone. So Carol Ann has developed some strength since their last encounter.
Sure.
She sits down in the hallway and remembers a conversation she had with Tangina, where Tangina gave her an incantation she can use. When she asked her, what is the incantation? And she says, it's the language of the dead, my dear. And she says, when spoken by the living, they have no choice but to adhere to it. And Carol Ann contemplates this. She wonders, why didn't I just use the incantation when I saw him? Why am I only now remembering that was an option?
Yeah.
And then she hears someone crying, and she turns around the corner, and it's Mason. He's on the bench just around the corner. And, she gives him a speech about, she says, it's okay. I've been through this. It's all right. And she comforts him basically.
Yeah.
And she gets him to go back to class. And Scott turns around the corner and he's impressed by her bedside manner. She's an awesome person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so they sort of start a romantic thing. So,
Cute.
ne- yeah, next day, we're back at the academy. Carol Ann is feeling better. She's eating some soup, and Scott and Mason sit at her table. He asks, is it any good? And she says, not really. And he goes, what if I told you there was a hot dog vendor right across the street? And she goes, we're not allowed to leave the premises until such and such o'clock. And he goes, don't worry, I'll get Jason to run interference. Oh, by the way, Jason's psychic gift, I think I skipped over it. Jason's basically your typical jock. He's not well mannered or anything. And his only psychic gift to speak of is that he can bend spoons with his mind.
Love it. Oh, hell yeah. Good for Jason. Does Scott have a power? Did we list Scott's power?
We did not. He is a mind reader.
Okay, okay, got
That's
it.
how he knew Carol Ann's name.
A little telepathic. Got
Um,
it.
so, just to recap for those keeping score at home, we have Carol Ann, we have a mind reader who is Scott, we have Jason, the spoon bender, Donna, the pyrokinetic, Heather, the telekinetic, Jasper, the language speaker, and Mason, the postcog.
Got it.
So,
Our X-Men.
yeah. So Mason and Carol Ann follow Scott's lead. What happens is we see that Jason's reading a book, but really it's to cover a copy of a dirty magazine. And he says, cover for us. And then he goes, sure. As soon as they're out the door, he's like, wait, for what? They manage to get out of the school without anybody noticing. The hot dog vendors right across the street. Scott explains they have the best dogs in that area of Chicago. They wait their turn. They cross the street, jaywalking, and Carol Ann is almost run over by a car.
Oh, no.
Scott is, heroically pulls her out of the way and asks if she's okay. She says yes, but as soon as that ends, we're cut to a scene of Tangina spilling the tea like she did in the original.
Okay.
Except instead of saying, oh my God, he found her, she says something along the lines of, oh my God, they've got her. And she immediately puts down the tea, excuses herself like she did in the film, and hops the red eye to Chicago.
Yeah.
We cut back to Carol Ann at home, and we notice that the heat, as it did in the original, is being sucked out of the apartments. Things are really getting cold.
Another reason Seton wouldn't have decomposed so quickly.
Yes. Anyway, I'm trying to recall what goes on from here, but Nance, we still have Pat working at a gallery, and it's not really an open. There is an opening going on, but it's not really her project. It's just an opening at a gallery.
Okay.
And Pat explains that there's been an emergency. She has to attend. Can Carol Ann please watch Tommy? No, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. We still have one more night. So what happens is Carol Ann gets home. Bruce isn't at the table at all. And
he was acting weird last time we saw him.
Exactly. And Pat says he's feeling under the weather. He'll be fine. The next day, Bruce isn't at the breakfast table. And what happens is Carol Ann says, where is he? And what happens is Pat says, he got up this morning. He's feeling better. He wanted to get an early start. Tommy looks at Carol Ann, and this is something I forgot to mention. In the taste testing of the Toastums versus Pop-Tarts, Tommy reveals that he can also read minds.
Oh.
So what happens is Tommy looks at Carol Ann and psychically says to her, she's lying. And Carol Ann says, what do you mean? He never got out of his room this morning. She said, how do you know? He goes, I got up to use the bathroom. The door was locked. He never came out of it. And we then cut to a scene of Bruce in the bedroom bathroom. And he's just staring at what we assume is a static screen, like when the TV's off.
Yeah.
But the camera pans around and we see he's actually staring into the bathroom mirror and it's glowing. We also see that his eyes are going hollow like the neighbor next door.
Oh no.
So we fast forward to later that day, and what happens is we see Carol Ann, coming home from school. Pat gives the same story about the gallery. It's like, there's an emergency. I have to be there. Can you watch Tommy?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tommy is complaining about the cold. He's already in his red onesie. I'm keeping the onesie
Love
just
it.
for the hell of it.
Hell yeah.
Except to make it a little more animated, it's got like logos of their local fire department and whatnot on it.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. Yep. 12-year-old boy's got some character. So,
Totally.
and he's complaining about the cold, and Carol Ann admits it's getting to her too. They try cuddling up under a blanket to stay warm. It's not really working. She puts a frozen dinner in the oven, and the oven's not even getting up to par. That's how cold it's getting.
Jesus.
So she goes next door and knocks just to see if they can borrow the neighbor's oven just to get things warm. The neighbor doesn't answer, and the camera pans inside the apartment to see the neighbor's doing what Bruce was doing. She's staring at a mirror that's glowing.
Wild.
Only she's got a new feature now. Not only are her eyes are gone, her whole face is gone. It's just smooth skin where the face should be.
Ooh, gross. Okay.
Yeah. Carol Ann goes back to the apartment and tells Tommy it was a bust. She said, we're going to be looking at peanut butter or something. Then there's a knock at the door. It's Scott and the kids from the school. And he said, it's Friday night. Do you want some company? And she goes, no, Pat's out. I have to babysit. And then she sees, wait a minute, is that pizza? And so she just lets them in because they've got warm food.
Hell yeah.
Donna makes mention of how cold it is and starts tapping the walls. At first, Carol Ann panics and she goes, don't worry, I'm just bringing in ambient heat. I'm not going to set the place on fire.
Nice.
So we then cut to a scene with Tangina, and Tangina's in a meditation on the plane. She's trying to make contact with Carol Ann. And when it doesn't work, she opens her mouth and there's cold breath coming out of it.
Ooh.
Tangina realizes this is bigger than she thought. She picks up the phone and calls a gentleman by the name of Derek. I forget the last name. I might have to look it up, but this is the Easter egg I mentioned when we did our sound test.
Yeah.
And she says, Derek, it's Tangina. Yes, I'm sorry about the time difference. Look, I have an emergency on my hands. I need you to look something up for me. And then she goes, no, it's a school. And then we cut back to Carol Ann. They're eating, the pizza. And Tommy looks at Mason and he says, why were you so sad yesterday? And Mason says, how did you know I was? And then they all realize he's talking about the classroom.
Mm.
And then Donna looks at Carol Ann and she says, he's one of us? And then she goes, I know. And then she goes, so why isn't he at the school? And then Carol Ann realizes, why isn't he at the school? They have a grammar school division.
Yeah.
And so the setup is making less and less sense. And Jason volunteers, okay, we need to change the subject. Is there a pool? And so the conversation leads to the Donna's little escape plan for the pool in the original.
Okay.
Now recycled with Carol Ann. And Carol Ann's like, on the such and such floor, and then she realizes what he's asking. And she says, no, absolutely not. Scott's like, come on. And she realizes it's not a horrible idea. They're not breaking any rules or anything. Well, they are breaking rules because the pool's not open to tenants at this time.
Right.
But she reluctantly agrees, but she says there's a trade-off. Someone's got to stay and watch Tommy. He can't be here by himself. Tommy says, well, I can go too. And then she goes, no, you can't. You never learned how to swim, remember? And so they draw straws to see who's going to stay with Tommy. Jason tries to use his power to break one of the other straws, but because the straws are not made of metal, it backfires. He gets the short straw.
That's
So
funny.
he's stuck with the kid and what is supposed to be his idea.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, so they all go upstairs and we replicate, the the whole pool scene where they're switching the cameras to VCR
Hmm.
so that nobody knows they're there. Except Heather does it with her telekinesis. The guard is right there and she's moving the cassette tapes,
That's
pressing
cool.
the
That's
buttons.
fun. I like that. A little,
Yeah.
what'd you call it earlier? Horror adventure.
Yes, yes. In my opinion, horror works best when you have this element
Yeah.
because, I mean, you can do just a whole, you know, you can do horror all by itself, but it still has to send a message of some kind.
Mm,
Um, an artistic one, if not a social one, or just, a piece of art from the
absolutely.
Oscar Wilde standpoint. Anyway, so getting back to the story, everybody's just jumping into the pool. Some uh, with no swimsuits. So we do see a little thrill for the thrill seekers who
Hell yeah.
come.
Right.
Um, and then we switch back to the apartment just to see how Tommy and Jason are making out. What's going on is Jason's doing push ups with Tommy on his back, and Tommy's loving it. But as we see, Tommy's wearing headphones and it's connected to a Walkman playing loud music, and Tommy's facing the skyline. Not Scott, Jason has the TV on and he's watching a dirty movie.
Oh
We don't
no.
really see what it is, but so in some ways he's turning out to be a good babysitter. In some ways he's just hopeless.
He's still a kid. He'll learn his ways.
Yeah. At one point, Tommy takes off the headset and goes, Jason, how come I can't face the TV? And he goes, because you can't. Now put the headset back on. um, anyway, so Carol Ann is out of the pool. She's drying off. Scott comes up and they have a little talk about what it's like to be different. Uh, he says he wouldn't trade it for anything. Carol Ann says that's all I would trade it for, a chance to
Mm.
be normal. Pat has a conversation with her about this earlier in the movie where she says, please, Carol Ann, normal is so déclassé, borrowing from the source material.
Yeah, yeah. Love that.
Um, anyway, he asks for some specific examples as to how horrible it was to be psychic at her age. She doesn't feel like bringing up Kane, so she instead decides to talk about what happened in the classroom yesterday.
Yeah.
And what happened is Mason is overhearing as he's getting out of the pool and he says, oh, yeah, and that creepy voice. And then immediately Caroline goes, what voice? Because she suspects Kane. And he said, I don't know. It was speaking a language I didn't recognize. And then Donna comes out of the pool and she says, what, you heard that voice too? And then they go, yeah, we heard the voice. And then she goes, did you see the flames? And they're like, what flames? And then everybody's out of the pool by this point, and we're realizing everybody had a similar experience. Somebody heard a voice, somebody saw flames. Mason reveals he saw flames,
Yeah.
and dozens upon dozens of screams. And Carol Ann still thinks it's Kane, but she's not 100% sure because this sounds out of step with Kane's MO.
Right.
And she knows he doesn't have his flock anymore. So she's not able to account for the thousands of voices they're all hearing in this shared vision, so to speak.
Well, and we just saw Kane very weak earlier too. So this is like a really I like what you're doing here. This is really shifting the mystery.
Yeah. So what happens is we see the heating room, and it's finally matching what we saw in the original with the piles upon piles of ice.
Mm.
And it finally hits the fuse box. And what happens is the power goes out all over the building. The TV goes out in Tommy's apartment. And I don't remember all the specifics of the haunt, but basically, Carol Ann has a bad feeling and she says, "We've got to get back to the apartment." Tommy is asked by Jason, "Do you have any lights, flashlights, candles?" Tommy says, "I think I have a flashlight in my bedroom." He goes to the bedroom and he notices his reflection is watching him. He's moving, the reflection is not. It's also
Ooh.
got the crooked smile that Carol Ann's reflection had earlier.
Ooh.
And so Tommy goes right up to it, not knowing what to think. And the reflection holds up its hands like this. Tommy does the same. And when he puts his hands on the glass, like in the original, it clutches him and it looks at him and it says, "We're here."
Ooh.
And then it proceeds to try and pull him onto the other side of the mirror. Jason hears him scream and grabs him. And this is where I give Jason a little, Jason's power a little more street cred, if you will.
Okay.
He notices the frame of the mirror is made of metal. So he starts bending it like he does with the spoons. And he bends it in such a way that it cracks the mirror.
I like
and he's
that.
able to pull Tommy out. They both look at each other and they realize they have to get out because they don't know what's happening. They go into the hallway, and it is a hall of mirrors, just like the original.
Hmm.
And they're noticing their reflections are watching them, just like in the apartment. So they make a beeline for the stairwell because the elevator's obviously not going to work here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as they're running for the stairwell, the mirrors, one by one, start lighting up like it's, I don't know, some
Ooh.
kind of fireworks show. And the final mirror right before the stairwell lights up. And as it does, a hand reaches out and grabs Jason by the shoulder and starts pulling him to the other side. Tommy grabs his feet in an ill-fated effort to try and save him. All he ends up doing is pulling off his sneakers,
Oh
and
no.
Jason is pulled into the void. Tommy just runs into the stairwell like Carol Ann did in the original, and he's going to be there for a little while. Meanwhile, back at the pool, everybody's almost ready to go. But Heather realizes she dropped her bracelet in the pool, and they're telling her not to go back in. She goes, "Don't worry." So she uses her power to try and bring the bracelet back to her. And it's right up to the edge of the pool. She reaches down, the pool lights up, and the hand grabs her.
Oh.
It pulls her in, the pool freezes over like it did in the original, and they're just staring, not knowing what to think. And then, to their horror, the pool explodes, and Heather emerges just like Scott did. And what happens is Carol Ann's about to approach her, saying, "Heather, what happened to you?" And Scott grabs her and says, "Don't." And then she says, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "It's not Heather." She
Ooh.
says, "What do you mean it's not Heather?" And he goes, "I can't hear her." And they look at Heather, and she has the crooked smile that the reflections had.
Yeah.
And she looks at them with sinister eyes. The pool lights up again, and they can tell she's about to make a run for them and try to get them into the pool. They run, they shut the door, they lock it. And as they lock it, Heather is banging on it, but she's making dents in the door. She should not
Jesus.
be this strong. And not only is she making dents in the door, they can tell she's not even using her power. So this is blatantly not her.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
go down the stairwell, and what happens is they see Tommy in the fetal position. Actually, I take that back. They don't see Tommy at first. They go to Carol Ann's floor to go into the apartment to find Tommy and Jason. They do that, and when they do, they're obviously not there. They find the broken mirror. Carol Ann is fed up. She wants to know what's going on. She looks at her reflection in the skyline window, and she says, "Kane, what is going on here? What are you doing?" And he says, but very faintly, "It's not me, darling." And then she says, "Yes, it is. Don't lie to me." And he goes, "Carol Ann, how can I be responsible? They won't even let me in." And she said,
Ooh.
"What do you mean?" And then he said, "They won't let me in the building." And before he can finish, he's gone. And she's realizing just now she never saw him in the building ever. It was only when she was out and about that he ever made contact.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And also, she remembers that in his rant in the bathroom, he said, "Carol Ann, don't, you're in terrible danger." And she's realizing something else is going on here. Something else is awakening.
Right.
And she looks at Scott and she says, "We have to get out of the building." They go and they're about to go back to the stairwell, but as soon as they do, all the neighbors' doors open. All the tenants step out.
I was waiting for
All the
this.
all the tenants have the crooked smile. And then, even more disturbingly, Carol Ann looks across the mirror. She and Scott, their reflections are staring at them with the same crooked smile. But when they look at the neighbors, their reflections all have the faceless bodies staring back.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, anyone who's just trying to put this together, the process that we're witnessing here is whatever the mirror does its thing. People lose their eyes, their irises first, then their whole face, then they cross over, and then these things come out. Except now they're accelerating the process.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Anyway, the tenants all look at Scott and Carol Ann. The reflections look at Scott and Carol Ann. They realize we're out of here. Again, the mirrors light up. They make it to the stairwell. They lock it behind them because Carol Ann has Pat's keys. Pat and Bruce are owners of the building,
Right.
as before. And when they do, Scott notices Jason's sneakers. He picks them up. They're like the typical white high top and of the 80s. And he goes, "These were Jason's. They have him." And then she goes, "What about Tommy?" And he goes, "I don't know." And so you hear Donna holler from downstairs. And she goes, "Guys, down here." So they all run downstairs and they see Tommy. He's in the corner in the fetal position. He's rocking side to side. And Carol Ann and Scott bend down. They say, "Tommy, what happened?" And then they said, "They tried to take me." And then Carol Ann says, "The mirror people?" And he nods. And then Scott says, "Tommy, what happened to Jason?" He says, "He saved me." And they don't even push any further.
Yeah.
Um, Scott picks him up and they figure, okay, we've got to get out of here. All the doors in the stairwell above them open, and the tenants are in the stairwell. So they rush down the stairs. The stairwells beneath them open up, and the tenants from the lower floors are coming up.
Oh my God.
Every single one of them has the crooked smile. They, let's see, they realize the floor they're on is the only option.
Yeah.
So they kick the stairwell door open and try to lock it behind them, but it's not really working. And the mirrors are lighting up again. The doors on the floor are opening. Tenants are coming out and they see the elevator has opened. They don't know why. They just know they have no choice. So they just run to the elevator. And people are coming out of their apartments. The mirrors are lighting up. They get to the elevator. The door to the stairwell's opening. Everybody's on this
Oh
floor.
my God.
And they're just pressing the button, trying to get the damn door to shut. It shuts, of course, at the 11th hour.
Right.
And they press the button for the lobby. And they're all trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they ask Carol Ann where this elevator leads. And she goes, "We can't go to the lobby. It's full of glass. It's full of reflective surfaces." And they go, "Well, where else can we go?" She hits the button for the basement level. She
Mm.
goes, "That'll take us out to the stairwell." We'll still have to make a break for it, but there's no reflective surfaces in the parking garage.
Yeah.
And he says, okay. So he gives Scott gives Tommy to Jasper. And this is the language interpreter.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he asks Jasper, when we heard that voice speaking in that weird language, what did it say? And then he said, I think it was something along the lines of phantoms come forward. Uh,
Whoa.
and then they decide not to even try and figure out what this means. He says, okay, Jasper, you ran track back at your old school. You're going to hold Tommy. You're going to make a break for it. So and so is going to cover. We're just going to, do this execution plan. And what happens is Tommy keeps tugging on Jasper's collar. And Jasper says, it's okay. It's okay. And then Donna says, I don't like this. And Carol Ann says, what do you mean? He goes, I don't like this. Why did they turn the power back on? Jasper finally pays attention to Tommy, and Tommy points up. Jasper looks up and he goes, I know why they turned it back on. And Carol Ann says, why? And he goes, because we just walked into a trap. They look up. There's a mirror on the ceiling.
Oh
It
no.
lights up. The cold starts coming out of the mirror. Donna immediately starts using the firepower to try and hold it back. And it's not working. It's just sucking up the heat like you
Ooh.
wouldn't believe. And what happens is they finally make it to the basement as Donna's about to lose the fight with the mirror. They all get out except Donna.
Oh no. Donna.
And the ice just swallows her whole and takes her into the mirror. And the door shuts. And what happens is they go, all right, we can't. Where's the door to the garage? Carol Ann points. They go to the garage door. Jason is already waiting for them, and he has the crooked smile.
Oh no.
Scott confirms that he's one of them now because he can't hear him. And Carol Ann basically says to him, what do you want from us? Who are you? What are you? And then Jason looks at them, and then he speaks. He says, I'm Jason, only not. And then he goes, and I want what anybody wants, Carol Ann. I want to live. And then she says, what the hell does that mean? And he goes, you'll understand once you're in the void.
Oh
And
boy.
he attacks them basically, and Scott basically gets into a fist fight with his brother, his brother's evil, whatever you want to call him.
Sure.
And as this is happening, Carol Ann is trying to break up the fight because that's her boyfriend. She just can't help herself.
Totally.
And she tells the others to run. And what happens is Mason finally can't take it. He attacks Jason. And a situation happens where they try to make a bolt for it, and the door shuts supernaturally. So we have Tommy, Jasper, and Scott in the garage, and now we have Carol Ann and Mason trapped with the Jason lookalike.
Okay.
A horror Jason of a different variety, if you
Right.
will.
Right.
And so where we go from here is Jason's down, but he's not out. He's slowly getting up as he recovers. And they're trying to get out. Scott and Jasper are trying to open the door from the outside. Tommy is so scared that he steps backwards into a puddle.
There you go.
But if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. Bring it right on back.
Yeah. So the puddle lights up, and the hands grab the footies of Tommy's pajamas. He screams for help. Jasper and Scott immediately go to help him. And we basically see the puddle scene reenacted. And it does take all three of them. It takes Jasper, then Scott, then Tommy.
Yeah.
And it seals up. Carol Ann sees it from the window in the door. And, she's just horrified. And then she and Mason hear Jason get up behind them. And they know he's getting ready to charge. There's no reasoning with him. Carol Ann just looks at Mason and says, follow my lead. And then as soon as he charges, they get out of the way. He bursts the door open. And then Carol Ann says, now they both make a run for it in the garage.
Yeah.
we see some elements of the pylon scene from the original. The sprinklers, of course, activate.
Totally.
They freeze. They start lighting up. Carol Ann and Mason just make a break for it, and they can only get out because they jump off of the railing of the parking garage and land in the dumpster just beneath it.
Oh my god.
Yeah, they get out ASAP and just run away from the building. But as they're backing away from the building, they're noticing all the windows on all the floors are lighting up. And they're also noticing nobody on the ground seems to be noticing it.
Mm.
It's almost like the building is veiled somehow. Like it's easiest way I can think of to describe it is like Doctor Who.
Okay.
Um, it's like the TARDIS is in the back of everyone's eye, but nobody really notices it.
Right, 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 right.
Um, anyway, they decide to go to the school for help because they're the only local authority that they know. They get into a cab to get to the O'Leary school. And when they get there, they realize none of them have any cash on them. The cabbie gets a little upset, and then you hear a feminine voice go, "With this help." And it's Tangina. She's there with a
Hey.
And Carol Ann, says, "Tangina, I'm so happy to see you." And then she goes, "Not to sound awkward, Carol Ann, but it should be me saying that to you." And then she goes, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Darling, you've been missing for months. Your parents have no idea where you are."
Whoa.
And then what happens is she goes, "Tangina, how can that be?" And then she goes, "I blatantly do not know, but I suspect, as I think you do, the answers lie in there." And she points to the school.
Mm.
And so Tangina explains that Pat did visit the family, and that Tangina found it interesting that she visited out of the blue because at first Diane seemed to have no memory of Pat at all.
Mm. Mm.
And that the idea for attending the O'Leary school had been pitched to the family, but the family had said no. They thought Tangina's lessons were sufficient. And that's when Carol Ann disappeared, maybe a week later. And they had no idea where she was up until now.
Wow.
And then she goes, "Tangina, do you think the school's connected to this?" And she's about to answer the question. And then Tangina stops midway and goes, "He can't be here." They turn around, Kane's watching from a window.
Mm.
And he goes, "I am just here to help." And then she goes, "No, you're not. You're here to pursue another opportunity. The beast has abandoned you, and so has your flock. Either surrender to the void or go into the light. Now get." And she does this gesture, and the mirror explodes in the hallway. She turns to Carol Ann and she says, "I've been wanting to do that since the first time I sensed him." So they go to the principal's office. This is Seaton's office.
Yeah.
And what happens is, along the way, Tangina picks up that Mason is a postcog. And she asks him a few questions about his gift, and he answers in the affirmative. And she says, "Okay, kids, time for a lesson this school could never teach you." And what happens is she tells them to all hold their hands up. They all hold their hands up, palm to palm. And Mason shares the vision they had in the classroom. And we can tell it's Chicago in the 1800s, but it's on fire. And we hear the voice saying, "Phantoms come forward, phantoms come forward."
Mm.
And Tangina ends the shared vision. And there is some tribulation in getting Mason to go along with it. And what happens is Carol Ann explains to Mason that that was the language of the dead, the language that Tangina taught her. And explains Jasper was able to decipher it because of his gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they turn around towards Tangina, and she has gone through Seaton's files, and she's finding all the teachers are conspiracy theorists and hacks.
Oh my
None of them,
god.
None of them have any educational credentials. And she's also finding they don't have credentials in parapsychology either. And she worked with parapsychologists in the first film, so she knows what the standards are
Yeah,
there.
yeah, absolutely.
So this school, it appears to be a cover. And Tangina says that she does sense an energy around it, but she says it's completely residual. It came from another source. And then Carol Ann said, "What source?" And she says, "Based on what you have described, I can only conclude it is the building where all of this happened."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what happens is she asks Mason to touch a little ornament on Seaton's desk. And she said, "Tell me, where does the energy from this object, let's say it's a paperweight, emit from in this room?" Mason points over to a shelf. Tangina pushes the shelf. It's a hidden room.
Ooh.
She looks at them and she goes, "Curiouser and curiouser." They go into the hidden room and they find a journal. And in the journal and in the notes I sent you, I have the full entries. But basically, it's a banker who faced financial ruin in New York City. His wife was supposedly a fortune teller, but her gifts made the wrong predictions on the wrong stocks.
Mm.
So they lost all of their money. They're trying to rebuild their careers in Chicago. They're on the poor end of town, not too far from where the famed Mrs. O'Leary once lived. Anybody who knows their history on the Great Chicago Fire knows Miss O'Leary was the scapegoat for the
Mm.
fire.
Mm.
Whether or not there was any truth to her cow kicking the bucket that caused it
Right.
is is still unknown.
Gotcha.
Um, so they're living in that part of town for lack of finances to live in the more influential areas.
Yeah.
The wife has taken in an Irish fortune teller who claims to be a medium. The husband allows it just to keep the wife off his back, but what's going on is they seem to have made contact with something. And they're
Mm.
hosting all these seances. The husband goes along with it because men of high repute are showing interest.
Mm.
So he thinks this is a way to weasel his way into the financial community.
Right, right, right.
Uh, I'll skip over the other entries and just say that the wife starts demonstrating a weird condition with her eyes, not too unlike the neighbor.
Right.
And then finally, it's at a point where the husband just wants it to go away. So they host a grand seance, and something seems to possess the wife and the psychic who's helping facilitate the seance. That's when the chant "Phantoms Come Forward" comes into play. The mirrors light up like the 4th of July, and they explode, and they end up causing the Great Chicago Fire.
Whoa.
Yes. And after the fire's over, we see the next journal entry revealing that the husband who kept this journal is, in fact, Seaton himself. And the wife is Aunt Pat.
Oh my God.
And what happened is they made contact with this entity that now possesses the building. They were pulled onto the other side of the mirror, and these things crossed over. And so they have been on Earth since the Great Chicago Fire.
Whoa.
After they're done reading the journal, Tangina points to the parchment that we see at the beginning of the film, and we see that the modern building is in what was supposed to be 1800 Chicago. And she goes, "I imagine this was a blueprint that they had originally designed for the city in the restoration period, but lacked the materials to build it."
Yeah.
And Carol Ann says, "Tangina, what is going on here?" Tangina explains that, as before, when we cross over into the other side, there is the spectral light that takes us to our final resting place. And then she says, there are dimensions that serve as an origin for other spirits. And then she says, And then there is a dimension known only as the void. No one has ever been there incarnate. And she goes, what is the void? And she says, it is where the lost souls, who for whatever reason no longer have an anchor to this or any other plane, they decimate, they dissipate, they cease to be, and whatever is left of their essence is transferred to the void.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes, I don't know how they did it, but they've managed to make contact with this place. And these spirits, these phantoms, who have no sense of self, now have found a way back to the world of the living, where they can assume new identities and pursue new destinies. And then Carol Ann
Whoa.
says, what happens to the others? And she says, the void is not a dimension for which there can be free flow. The door swings only one way. For one to exit the void, one must first enter. I suspect they are using the mirrors to do this. And then she looks at them both and says, a rule that is bended but not broken.
Mm.
And they decide they have to go back to the building because it's clearly some kind of machine designed to bring phantoms from the void in en masse.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
the mirrors are everywhere. That's why the whole place looks like a giant glass house, so
Yeah.
to speak. So as they're in the hallway, they see a figure looming over them, and it's Seaton. And Seaton has the crooked smile. The mask is completely off. He goes on a rant about how they just want to live and asks Carol Ann to help. And she says no. And he says, Carol Ann, it doesn't have to be this way. We can come to an agreement. We are reasonable creatures, unlike that old man who's been following you around.
Oh.
And Tangina interrupts. And what happens is he attacks them. He takes Mason into a chokehold and threatens to kill him if Carol Ann refuses to come with them.
Mm.
Tangina says no. Carol Ann says, it's the only way, Tangina. And she leans over to kiss Tangina and whispers something into her ear. She approaches Seaton and she says, let Mason go and I'll go with you. He lets Mason go, takes her hand, and as soon as he does, she puts her arm around Seaton like she's embracing him, and Seaton starts screaming. His skin is burning, and we see that when Carol Ann leaned into Tangina, Carol Ann undid Tangina's necklace, the one that Taylor gave her. She let it drop into her palm, and now she's applying it right to Seaton.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and Seaton, the Seaton double basically dies. And, it's whatever 80s gore you want to imagine it
Hell
to
yeah.
be.
Absolutely.
I was never one for that personally, but that's me. So I'll let the listeners decide what this looks
Sure.
like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Seaton is now dead. Tangina congratulates Carol Ann, and she explains to Mason what this necklace is. And he goes, it just wards off spirits? And she goes, no, it is more than that. It is a key to all worlds. When wielded by the right person, we could use this to reverse the machine that they have built.
Mm.
It's a little more articulate than what I just said,
Sure.
but
Sure.
anyway. So they go back and they're looking at the building, and the building is charging up. It's ready to go. Mason points out that they can't just enter through the front lobby. And then Tangina says something along the lines of outside in. She said they get into the window washer, and Tangina tells Carol Ann to hold out her hand to try and sense the heart of the building. They land on this one floor, and Carol Ann says it's here. And Tangina says, are you sure? And she goes, all the cold is coming here.
Mm.
This is the place. And Tangina grabs a shovel. They're going to break their way in the way Tom Skerritt's character did.
Yeah.
And what happens is this is when Tangina dies. They literally, hands come out from the mirror and pull Tangina. She doesn't go through the mirror. She instead falls and, dies of sudden impact
Oh,
on the
whoa.
ground.
Damn.
Yep. And then what happens is the glass kind of, it's not broken, but it is kind of cracked. And we see Pat's reflection. No, not Pat. It's Mason. His reflection. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank as to who I wanted this to be when I wrote
Sure.
it, but we'll say it's Scott. We'll go with him. And it's the reflection, and he starts talking specifically to Mason. And he goes, Mason, you don't have to be afraid. In the void, all the pain goes away. You can come through. Someone else will come out. And when you're ready, we'll have someone to take your place in the void. You can come out with a new identity, a new whatever. And then he
Whoa.
goes, Mason, you don't have to be ashamed about the way you were born anymore. And then Mason's like, how do you know? And he goes, Mason, I remember the way you used to look at me in class. And then he goes, I know how you look at all the boys in class. You don't have to be this way. You don't have to take the rejection. You don't have to. And Mason knows he's, fucking with him.
Yeah,
He's
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to get him to come across of his own accord. Carol Ann's trying to talk him off the ledge, so to speak. Mason just can't take it anymore. And he goes and he hollers and he screams and he punches the glass. And as soon as it does, it has that kind of melting effect that we saw um, in the original. And Carol Ann grabs him, but it's no use. The mirror is sucking him in.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we see Mason, and she loses her grip. We see Mason's sneakers sticking out of the glass as it sucks him in, kind of like a horizontal quicksand, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Carol Ann realizes she's on her own now, but she can't do this alone. Um, she looks into the mirror and summons Kane. He shows up and she says, if you help me, I'll lead you into the light. And he says, I have no use for the light, darling. You're coming over to this side with me if I do this. And she goes, I can't. And he goes, you will if you want my help.
Whoa.
She weighs her options and she agrees. She takes the deal. You help me save my friends, I'll stay with you. So Kane says, it's very simple, Carol Ann. Just take my hand. He extends his hand. She takes it, and they're in the building now. And in this apartment, it's just a giant crystal maze. She asks him what it is, and he says, this is the heart of the building. This is the point from which the portal emanates and then descends and ascends to each floor. And so they're moving through this maze of mirrors, and we see Tommy. His reflection is banging on one of the glasses, and he's begging Carol Ann to help him.
Whoa.
And she's about to, but then Kane pulls her away and says, I cannot believe you would fall for something that amateur. I tried at least that with your family the first time.
That's funny.
Uh, yep. They keep going, and we're seeing Carol Ann's friends, we're seeing tenants, and then he goes, they will use the image of all they've taken to get you to cross over. And then we see the one reflection that is standing out, and that's Diane, Jo Beth Williams' character.
Yeah.
Um, I would hope that if they had done this, Jo Beth would be willing to say yes.
Totally.
And just a quick note on Jo Beth Williams. There was an indie film she was in years ago, in '93, I think, called Me, Myself, and I. She played a woman with split personality.
Oh, whoa.
It's on Tubi. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but I really think it's worth checking out just because she did such a great job of playing a character that is unrecognizable from Diane. Ironically, her two characters in that film were called Sane Diane and Crazy Diane.
That's funny.
Crazy Diane is just a joy to watch. Anyway, back to our pitch. Um, so Diane says this is a trap. Kane is working with them. She can't trust him. And then Kane says it's just another illusion. And Carol Ann is on the split over whether or not this is or isn't her mother.
Yeah.
So she asks her mother. So Carol Ann reaches into the back of her memory and she recovers a memory. And I can't remember what it was, but she asks Diane, what did you say when such and such happened? The reflection can't answer. And then she said, you're not my mother. And then the reflection takes the crooked smile and she says, you will come over here, Carol Ann. You will. And then they just walk away. They finally get to the heart of the maze, and it's like this giant crystal table that looks like it's set for four. And a hooded figure comes in, white robes, and it's Pat. She takes down the hood and she reveals that, what we already know, that she was a phantom that came over from the void.
Yeah.
And has been here ever since, has been putting up this operation. And then Carol Ann said, so what did you want with me? Why did you kidnap me? And something I did fail to mention is that Pat did have a power. She was something of a pusher, that she could touch you and drop an idea in your head.
Yeah.
Or take an idea from your head.
Interesting.
So that was how she managed to get Carol Ann away from her family and over to Chicago. So she asks her, why did you kidnap me? And she goes, Carol Ann, don't you understand? You're our miracle. You're the reason we had to wait so long because of your gift. And she goes, what gift? I'm a medium. There's nothing special about that. And she goes, but there is, Carol Ann. You're not a medium. She looks over at Kane and she goes, do you really think he was what punched a hole into your world? And then she looks at Kane and she goes, look at him. Without the beast, he's nothing. And then she goes, and even the beast has limits. And then Carol Ann looks at her and she goes, what are you saying? She goes, Carol Ann, he manipulated your gift when he took you from your family. She said, your gift is not that you're a medium. Your gift is that you have the ability to unlock worlds.
Whoa.
And when you think about it, you look at the original film, none of that craziness happened until she started talking to people in the television.
Yeah.
And then scenes later, the famous they're here, they had asked her to do something, I think, if memory serves. And of course, after that conversation, that's when they go out of the TV into the wall. So
Right.
that's bringing that moment full circle. And Pat, never mind. I'm at my uncle's. That's his phone. We can just ignore it.
No worries.
Yeah. Anyway, so Carol Ann is face to face with Pat with this revelation, and Pat makes her an offer. To make a very long story. Oh, one last thing. When Kane asks how Pat knew that it wasn't him that punched the hole into the world, she just looks at him and says, because I'm smart and I'm her friend, which is a line Kane used with Craig T. Nelson.
Yeah, yeah.
So from here, Pat pitches Carol Ann an offer. She says, if you open the door for us permanently so that it stays open in perpetuity, we'll let you leave. And then Carol Ann goes, as simple as that? And she goes, as simple as that. We'll keep him here so that he never bothers you ever again. And if you want, we will take your gift. And then she goes, you'll be completely normal.
Ooh.
And Carol Ann is contemplating this. And Kane says, don't believe her, don't. And then Pat just snaps her fingers and Kane is frozen into this sphere of ice.
Wow.
So Kane's out of the picture. Carol Ann is thinking, and in her head, we see this montage of everything she learned at the O'Leary School, quote unquote, learned. All the lessons from Tangina, the language of the dead, her conversations with her new friends. She looks at Pat and says, I'll do it, but I want my friends released now. And then Pat doesn't say a thing. She just snaps her fingers. We're back at the pool. It lights up. And what happens is all the kids are released. They all go swim to the surface of the pool. Jason looks around and he realizes Tommy isn't with them. And then he remembers Tommy can't swim. So he takes a breath. He swims back down. Tommy is drowning at the bottom of the pool.
Whoa.
And while he's drowning, he looks and he sees Carol Ann talking to him. And she says, Tommy, I need you to listen to me and remember everything I'm telling you. And then we cut back to Carol Ann. Pat is taking Carol Ann to this table. And she goes, I set a place for you right here. And Carol Ann sits down and she goes, just put your hand right here in the center of the table. You don't have to do anything. Just give us the juice. So she does as she's told. And Pat begins speaking in the language of the dead. As she does, let's see, people are coming out of their apartments. The faces are gone. These are people that they've been trying to suck in when the building went apeshit. They're slowly making their way up to the pool like an assembly line. And this is going to be a mass transition, basically.
Yeah.
And we get back to the pool. Jason rescues Tommy from the bottom, pulls him up, gives him the Heimlich maneuver so he can breathe, and then swims to the edge of the pool. Everybody's wet, and Scott goes, where's Carol Ann? And then Tommy pulls on Scott and says, she told you to look in my head. And so Scott does. And he hears Carol Ann giving instructions in the memory. He says, Jasper, you think you can brush up on that language we all heard? So what happens is Pat is continuing the ritual. Carol Ann is clutching the fist that she has that's free. We get back to the pool. Everybody's in a circle holding hands, and they're giving their own chant. As they're chanting, the faceless ones are coming in to the pool room. They're lining up. They're going to go into the pool. Their replicas are coming out, going to be coming out. And what happens is suddenly it's not working anymore. Be just one moment. So sorry. All right. Just making sure it wasn't me. I'm sorry. I know that's annoying.
No
anyway, so Pat notices it's not working. I mean, it's working, but it's on freeze. And then she goes, what could possibly be? She turns around. She notices Carol Ann is clutching Taylor's necklace.
Right. Okay.
And it's the interference. And then she goes, Carol Ann, you have to drop that if this is going to work. Carol Ann refuses to drop it. And she goes, and not that we're stepping into that trap, but she keeps going, Carol Ann, what are you doing? And she keeps asking the question, though not saying her name with every sentence.
Sure.
And then this is where things get interesting. Carol Ann, in her head, you hear her go, come on, come on. And then what happens is her friends start chanting the same chant, phantoms come forth, but it's reversed. It's phantoms return.
Okay.
And what happens is suddenly the faceless ones start marching away from the pool, and they're just standing there like they're sergeant at arms or something. And the phantoms, now in their new form, are slowly marching back to the apartments, marching back through the mirror.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then Pat realizes what Carol Ann did is she reversed the feed, using her friends as the chant and using her power and using the necklace to block Pat's little thing going on.
Right.
And then she goes, you reverse the feed. And then Carol Ann says, I'm putting it back the way it's supposed to be. And then she said, we had a deal. And then she said, you shouldn't have kidnapped me or something like that. And then she goes, we had a deal. You were supposed to keep it. Carol Ann looks at her and says, I could have, but that would have been so déclassé. Pat just screams and attacks her. Carol Ann uses the necklace to try and fend her off. A battle is ensuing while everybody's chanting to get the phantoms to go back. Long story short, every phantom goes back with the exception of Pat. Finally, Carol Ann gets the advantage and just pushes her into the mirror, and Pat just screams bloody murder. Carol Ann gets back to the table, finishes the ritual, and locks the door. And every single reflective surface in the building just explodes.
Nice.
And all the faceless phantoms just drop right on the floor like they drop dead. When the chaos is over, the people who were phantoms are getting up, but their faces are back. They're completely back to normal. And Donna looks at Scott and says, she did it. And then Scott realizes something's still wrong. So he makes a beeline, using his gift to try and zero in on Carol Ann. He gets to the apartment, the door's locked. Carol Ann gets up from the table, which is cracked because it's made of glass.
Yeah.
And she notices Kane is free and he wants to collect on the deal. And then she says, I'm sorry, but I can't. And then she goes over to the window, which is open because of the explosions. And she's getting ready to jump. And then Kane says, you can't do that. You're no good to me, dead. And then she goes, I know. And then she goes, if I have to give up my life force to stop you, that's what I'm going to do. And he
Whoa.
begs, he pleads. You hear Scott screaming from the other side of the door. And before Kane can make his one last plea and before Carol Ann can jump, that's when Tangina shows up and makes a speech about leading him into the light. And then he goes, I don't want to go. And then Tangina says, you want to continue your existence. You have seen the options. Now you choose. And then she goes, Carol Ann can make good on her threat, and I'll lead her into the light. Or you can give up, and I'll lead you into the light. And she says, one way or another, I'm taking one of you to the other side.
Damn. All right.
And Kane looks at Carol Ann, and he looks at Tangina, and Carol Ann says, aren't you tired? And then he goes, I am, but I'm also afraid. And then Tangina says, all are welcome in the light. None are turned away. And reluctantly, Kane reaches out his hand. Tangina takes it, and the glass uncracks as it's now a portal to the spectral light.
Yeah.
And Tangina gives the speech about, I'll miss you, the sentimental stuff. And she says, but you will not be alone. I have made arrangements. And Carol Ann says, what do you mean? And then Tangina and Kane disappear in the light. The door unlocks. Scott's there. We get a montage of them walking through the building now that everything's back to normal and everybody's just, what happened? What is going on here? And also because the building's veil is gone, the police and the fire department are showing up.
Right. Right.
So we cut to a scene at the police station, and you just hear Chicago officers talking to each other because they haven't got a clue what any of this was about. And what happens is Carol Ann's holding Tommy, and she's looking around, and she sees Mason, and she puts together that he's gay, basically.
Yeah.
She asks Scott to do her a favor because she's following up on an instinct that's since developed, a psychic one, if you will. Scott looks into Jason's mind and then whispers something to Carol Ann. Carol Ann looks at Tommy, and no, she doesn't. What happens is an officer says, Carol Ann, could you please come with us? And she looks at Tommy and she goes, I don't want to leave him. And they say, hold on, just looking up a name for the Easter egg because it's coming full circle. And I want to make sure I get this name right. You can click this part out in editing if you want. Right. So what happens is Jason says, I'll take him because he and Tommy are basically bonded at this point. She looks at Tommy and she says, you want to stay with Jason while I'm away? And he nods his head, yes. I should point out that when they went through the O'Leary files, they discovered Tommy was not Pat's son. That
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. A
that
kidnapped
he
child.
had, yeah, that he had also been kidnapped. Because that was the whole scheme of the school, to find the psychic who had the magic potion
Right.
to unlock the gate.
Right.
So what happens is she goes into the police room, and on her way out, she whispers to Mason. And what happens is it's revealed that the dirty magazine that Scott was looking had both heterosexual and homoerotica in the magazine. Jason is bi. And she explains this to Mason and says, he has noticed you. As she goes into the police room, and this is going to be the final scene, there's a man standing with Chicago PD, and he asks the officers to leave the room. The man introduces himself as Derek Deland. Dr. Derek Ryan. I had the name wrong. And she says, hello, sir. And he says, don't worry about an explanation. I've already combed it over with Chicago PD. And then she says, thank you, but why? And he explains that he is a friend of Tangina Barons, the late Tangina Barons. That was the man she was on the phone with on the way over.
Right.
And right before we cut to credits, he says, Carol Ann, did Tangina, in her conversations with you, ever mention an organization called The Legacy?
Ooh.
Cut to credits. Now, to anybody listening to this who doesn't know what I'm talking about, in the 90s, there was a series called Poltergeist, The Legacy. It had absolutely nothing to do with these films.
Right.
Basically, what The Legacy was it was kind of like a supernatural FBI. It was started in the Middle Ages. It is autonomous. It doesn't answer to any of the governments. And it was kind of like supernatural in that they dealt with ghosts, demons, witches, what have you.
Yeah.
But they were a little more sophisticated operation. They had what was known as houses located throughout the globe. The headquarters was in London. The show focused on the San Francisco house. And they had like people belonging to them run for Congress, enroll in police departments, etc. So their bases were covered. They could move in and out of a crime scene without anybody caring or knowing.
Nice.
And so the series followed the character I just mentioned, who was the head of the San Francisco house. And the second main character was a psychiatrist. I can't remember her name. I think the character's name was Rachel.
Okay.
Who didn't believe in the supernatural. And he basically recruited her to join the Legacy. And so it's a fun show, but it had nothing to do with the franchise. So why they called it Poltergeist or how they got away with it, I don't know. You would have to ask them. But I thought it'd be a nice Easter egg to kind of bridge it.
Yeah.
And also just a nice way to kind of end the series. So you don't really need Carol Ann going forward. And if you choose to include her, obviously played by another actress,
right,
you've got a framework that makes sense and doesn't rely on a tired old plot that no longer makes sense.
Yeah, well, and like imagine if Carol Ann gets to come back as a Tangina-like character later. If we give her a break for a little while, you've already aged her up a little, give her another, decade of messing with her powers, and it'd be cool to revisit her down the line.
Yeah.
Your references are all on point. Like I really feel like you're tying this trilogy together with a bow.
Yeah. And also, the legacy, it's like they had psychics who were in their ranks.
Yeah.
I mean, they had scientists. They even had a Catholic priest who had an on again, off again appearance. And so you could always make it that Tangina, Taylor, or whomever were members of this group.
Yeah, I like that.
And also, it would make sense that Carol Ann would want to be absorbed into an organization that understood her and also could give her a break so she didn't have to shoulder everything that she experienced. Anyway,
We could final shot. We could get another crooked smile reflection in a
oh yeah.
mirror, and then have "Make Me Smile" by Chicago play into the credits. Is that too on the nose? Am I pitching on the nose there?
Um, I would. Well, the only problem I have with that is you have to explain how the void is still in play. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, no, that's true. No, you're right. You're
because
right.
then it's cute, but then we're having the same problem we have at the ending of the original,
I
where
definitely,
Kane is laughing.
yeah, I definitely don't want to hurt the continuity here.
Yeah, I mean, you can have Aunt Pat screaming from the void because she's finally cut off. But
Okay. No, yeah, I like that. I like that. That's a very Superman 3 kind of way to go with it. That's fun. Man,
yeah,
I love this pitch. This is I feel like you could take out all the Poltergeist like canonicity and you still have a killer movie here. Like you said, like the New Mutants aspect is very obvious here, and this would have you could almost pitch this as a New Mutants movie. Like I would watch this as a new like instead of Pat have like Mojo or some kind of watching type character as your
the Shadow
background.
King.
Shadow King, absolutely. Yeah, you
Yes.
could easily like sub this into that universe. It's a killer story. This is a great pitch.
Yep. The only thing with Shadow King is, of course, he's tethered to Storm, so you have to figure out a way for her to be there. And also, and we're not rescuing New Mutants per se, but since you brought it up,
Since I cracked that door open.
yeah, I these were characters I was less familiar with because I know this is blasphemy if you're a comic book fan, but I never really read the comics. I only in my small town, you could only read what was available at the local bookstore.
Yeah.
And sometimes they had what you wanted, sometimes they didn't. So I read a few comics, by which I mean I flipped through the pages. I was still learning how to read.
Right.
Um, and so, but I grew up watching the 97 series, which I know is coming back to Disney Plus, and I'm
Yeah.
all for it. I have to see it to know whether or not it's worth the effort.
We can hope.
But we can hope. But I remember the Shadow King was a villain in 2 episodes of the original animated series. And he is so tethered to Storm that you have to figure out a way to bring her in.
Totally.
And also, just a note on New Mutants, Dr. Reyes made no sense as the villain. Because when I looked her up, it's like there was nothing in her comic history that was even adjacent, not even her being taken in by who I assume was Mr. Sinister.
Yeah.
And so she makes no logical sense. If we're talking an operation that's being run by Sinister, what would make more sense is one of his minions, like Vertigo, for instance. And I argue Vertigo would make more sense, not just because of her loyalty to Sinister, but the effects she has, her power has on people, would genuinely make more sense as to why one person is able to keep these people
Yeah, that does make sense.
in one place. I mean, the scene where they gang up on Reyes when the jig is up, it's like, why didn't you do that before?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't need her to be evil to want to hate her or to want to gang up on her.
Exactly.
She brought you into this place you didn't want to be in the first place, and she's holding you there without your permission.
Yeah. With almost
And
no staff.
exactly. I mean, it would have made It would have made more sense if it was Vertigo. It would have made more sense if we found out the school was located on Genosha before Magneto took it over.
Right. No, that also true. Oh my God. That would have been a cool reveal for the end of the movie. Like you think the shield is like there to keep them from getting out, but come to find out it's to keep other stuff from getting in because they're not even where you think they are. That would be a cool end of movie
Yeah.
reveal.
Also, just the fact that it would, if you're keeping Reyes as the villain, to me, it makes more sense that she'd be taken in by Magneto
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she's a mutant. She wants to create a better world. I can see even the most pious X-Men being taken in by Magneto because when he, is going on his rants, he's not wrong.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, mutants don't even exist in the real world. And even we, as mere mortals, can see he's not wrong.
Exactly. He's aged like fine wine. Well, damn,
Really.
what a great pitch. I really appreciate you taking the time and taking all the reschedules just to get here. But man, I feel like the payoff was worth it. It almost makes me want to go back and watch the first two movies just to like re-listen to this and watch it all pay off.
Yeah. And it also, the scheduling, if it makes you feel any better, today happens to be my birthday. So this was the ultimate birthday gift.
Happy
So
birthday,
thank you.
Cody. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Your birthday pitch, and it was excellent. That's all we
Thank
got to
you.
say about that.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I
So,
think this is going to wrap the show up here. I really appreciate all your hard work on this. I can't wait to see what the reaction is to your pitch, and all the Poltergeist fans out there. I can only imagine they're just vibrating to be represented well with a good pitch to round out their series.
one can hope.
Right, exactly. Well, that's going to do it for us here on Film Rescue today. We'll catch you next time. I think, if I remember correctly, the next one that'll be coming out is Star Trek V. So we're going to go from dealing with the devil and hell to God in heaven.
Oh my God. Well, I I have a few fan theories about that particular. I just won't drag out the show. I'll just come out and say it. I genuinely think that thing was a giant Q.
Yeah. Okay, I could see that. I could see that being a cue. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I have a theory of the Qs in general. I'll just put it this way: we know at the end of Picard, Q outright said he doesn't view time linearly.
Yeah.
There's only one other species that we know of that said that, and that was the Prophets in DS9. So my fan theory is that the Prophets, the Q, and that thing in the Final Frontier are all the same species. They met Cisco, they learned about linear time, they became the Q, they created the continuum, and then along the way they had to kick people out. So
Damn.
the Pares, I think, are exiled Qs. I think that thing in whatever it was called, Shadani, something like that.
Yeah. Shakani.
Shakani, that Cybok visited. I believe that was an exiled Q. And just for shits and giggles, I even think the Borg Queen was an exiled Q.
Whoa! Okay, I gotta stop the show. You've not only pitched Poltergeist 3, New Mutants, now you're giving us Star Trek. I gotta pull the reins in here. I'm gonna get angry letters.
As well you should. We'll be here all night.
Well, let me wrap it up here then. That's gonna do it for Film Rescue. I've been your Pitchmaster General, Seth. Thanks for being here, Cody, and good night.